in-person special meeting of the Board of Education. Am I ready?
Yeah.
Sorry. This is an in-person meeting of the Board of Education. It's Monday, June 2nd, and the time is 6:39. We have a quorum. We're at Harding High School's library. In attendance, I'm Jennifer Perez, Board Chair. We have Joseph Sokolovic, Maritza Estremera Jimenez. Online, we have Akeisha Casimir, Andre Woodson, and Dr. Avery is joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Nick Caruso from CAVE.
Who was the third person online?
Andre and Akeisha. That's it. Andre and Akeisha.
So there were two.
Two online, yeah.
Good evening. This is number 6.
Yes,
You made it.
Yes.
yes.
Good for you. I mean, you had to sit here and go through all this work, and I hope you found it beneficial so far. You're going to find tonight very beneficial, I think. Chris Horan, who has been involved with school boards and school districts for years, you can fill in some of the blanks for us, but I've seen him present both on a national level at the Trainers Conference a few years ago, as well as he's been at a couple of K-CAPS events, I think, along the way. I'm going to leave it to Chris to fill in the blanks, but I think we're very fortunate to have him here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone.
No?
Hello.
I'm going to start by apologizing to the folks online who are going to be looking at my back most of the night. I'll try to say hello every now and then, but I appreciate the invitation to be here. Thank you so much for having me for number 6 of 6 sessions. I hope tonight's going to be useful to you to talk about communication. Sorry, I'm going to get myself in order here.
Hey, guys. Hey, Rob.
Hello.
We have nameplates today.
Are you Robert Traber?
I am.
I'm Chris Horan. You are right here, my friend.
Chris, thank you.
So thank you. First of all, I want to thank also Gabe, Nick and Jody in particular for inviting me to be part of this conversation tonight and to work with you on communication. A couple of just housekeeping things. One, I'm going to provide these slides after the evening, so I will give you the deck to look at later on. And also I'm going to sort of introduce myself more fully in a few minutes after we go through some other introductions, so you know sort of a little bit more about my background and the lens through which I approach this work. So tonight, effective communication. Communication is a huge topic, as you know, and we can come at this from a lot of different ways. So I've spent some time over the last few weeks or so, especially working with Nick and Jody, sort of getting a handle on what you all are thinking, what you are working on, what you are struggling with, what you are aspiring to do and become, and especially in the area of communication. And to me, it's not just about sort of what the state thinks you should be doing or what CAVE thinks you should be doing, but also what you yourselves are saying you want to work on in terms of communication. So I was fortunate to have the self-assessment from Nick that you all undertook. And there are certainly themes going through those comments that you all provided about communication, both the things where you feel like you've made progress as a team and some areas where you still may need work, whether it's within the board itself, the superintendent, or between the board and the public, and so on and so on. So tonight we're going to talk about each of those things in different forms, including, as I just said, thinking about communication within the board. Now, as Nick was saying earlier before the meeting started, you know, this is something that some people do for a living. They really work on sort of team building and conflict resolution and all those things that all kinds of teams need, whether it's in the workplace or the athletic field. I've done some of that work, and we're going to talk about some of those things tonight. And the same for another aspect of communication, which is the relationship between the board and the superintendent, and how communication either works or it doesn't work in that relationship. Much more of my work is about the other side of the coin, which is about the relationship and the communication between the board and superintendent, meaning district leaders, and your constituents, the people you serve, primarily families, staff, and the community, right? So what does that communication look like? And you'll notice that these arrows that I've put between these different icons are two-way arrows, and that's intentional, because as you know, communication is not just what we provide, what we state, the stories we tell, but also thinking about two-way communication and how we hear back from people and how well do we listen or not how well do we listen at times. So we're going to talk about that aspect of communication during the evening as well. Okay. I'm going to run through the agenda really quickly just to give you an idea of sort of how the evening is going to flow. We're starting a little bit late, so I'm gonna have to make up some time, but I will figure that out. We're gonna do some introductions at the moment. I can find a little bit more about each of you, about me. And I want to start off by talking a lot tonight about public confidence in public schools. I think this is a great incentive for communications work. So we're thinking about what is the public's level of confidence in our schools and our school board, and what can we do to sort of strengthen and enhance that confidence so that people feel good about sending their kids to these schools, about working for the district, about investing in the district, about paying taxes that support the district, and so on. So public confidence to me is a really important piece of the puzzle. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. Some of the ways we're going to do that, I'm going to share with you some lessons that I've learned and I've passed along over the years from my years working in the Boston Public Schools. We're going to engage in a small group exercise to talk more about public confidence and how that gets shaped. We're going to have a short break at some point. And then we're going to sort of spend the second half of the evening talking about how to improve communication, specifically from the Board of Education. How can you all do a better job communicating with your constituents about your work, about who you are, what you're working on, what you're trying to accomplish, and so on. So hopefully some very tactical advice that you can put into action. And I promise you, we will wrap up as close to 9:30 as possible. Does that all sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Excellent.
I just want to let the record show Ms. Medina join the meeting.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Medina. Nice to see you again.
Again, amen.
Okay. So introductions.
Oh,
Yes.
Mr. Tabor as well.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I missed you, but you announced yourself.
We did. I said, Amir, hi.
Sorry, I forgot to announce you.
Albert's walking in. The record didn't show.
I know, the record showed about 5 minutes ago, Mr. Tabor joined the meeting.
Thank you all for being here. Okay, so what I would like to get to quickly is just go around the room and ask each of you to say really briefly your name, how many years you've been on the Board of Education, and in one sentence, why did you run for this office? I realize in some cases that may be a longer story, but I'm going to ask you to be really brief and just tell me in one sentence, why did you choose to run for the Board of Education? Okay, may I start with the chair?
Yes. Jennifer Perez. Been on the board for 1.5 years. I was actually appointed to this seat, but I really just, I think like most people, like just wanted to make some changes to the system that has not been kind to the citizens here of this town.
I'm sorry, say that again, Jennifer.
Just make changes to like a system that hasn't been good to us,
Okay,
the student.
great, thank you. Do you want to welcome your other colleague?
Yes, Mr. Benahan has joined the meeting.
Hello, I'm Chris Horn. Dr. Royce.
I am Dr. Avery. I'm the interim school superintendent, and I've been in the district for almost 2 years now. First year in the role of deputy superintendent. In the last 8 months, the interim school superintendent.
Great. And I realize the question is a little different for you. Why did you choose to pursue district leadership on the administrative side?
I retired in another state, and after 5 years, came out of retirement to take a deputy job to support the work of the incoming superintendent. And I felt I had an opportunity to kind of make an impact in this community, and that's why I'm here.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Joseph Kolovec, 7+ years. I initially ran the board to fight against injustice and for school funding
What was the second part?
and for school funding.
Right.
Go hand in hand.
Thank you.
Willie Medina, 1 year, 6 months. Why did I run for office? Purpose. It was a plan, God's plan, put it in destiny.
Thank you.
Hi, Maritza Stromera Jimenez, and I have been in this role for 4 months. And the reason why I decided to run for board member was because there were things that were being done that I didn't really appreciate or were not I didn't think that they were in the interest of children. So I wanted a seat at the table to make sure we always focused on kids.
About my less than perfect writing, but hopefully it's legible. Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Albert Benehangara. I'm one of the board members. This is my second term in 6 years. And I've been in the district for almost 20 years. For my son started kindergarten until he graduated from State High School. So I was a PAC and PTSO for
Okay, say that
president.
again.
PAC and PTSO.
Okay.
That's leader of each school. And doing it for almost 20 years. And after that, when I done one of the high school parents, teachers, staff community told me, Mr. Benehan, we need you as a board member because I'm a fighter for the kids, for the student, funding the school, the right, all the stuff,
Right.
that we need in a Bridgeport Public School.
Thank you.
Rob Traber, I was filled a vacancy in the spring of 23, so 2.5 years ago. I was a parent activist in the 90s. I became a teacher in 2001 and was a union leader in the union. After I got off the board, an opening came up and I applied for it to continue fighting for improved schools in Bridgeport.
Great. Thank you. Jody, you want to reintroduce yourselves and
Yeah.
And we have
everything about?
Go online.
Because he has to go
Big
online.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, please.
Akeisha, Ms. Casimir, sorry.
Hello, my name is Akeisha Casimir. I joined the board. I was appointed to the board January of 2023. Why did I run for this office? I've dedicated my personal and professional life to improving the quality of life of students, particularly African American students, because they're the most vulnerable.
Great. Thank you, Akeisha.
And then we have Mr. Woodson, Andre Woodson.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, Andre Woodson, been on the board for a year and a half. And I ran for just representation, just looking to see more people like myself in positions like this, so we could help make the Bridgeport schools better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Woodson. Nick, Jody, you want to introduce yourselves and share any of your why?
Well, this being my 19th meeting in Bridgeport tonight, you probably know more about me than my family. I would say that the reason I enjoy coming back time and time again is because I genuinely care about this district. I've gotten to know most or all of you and really enjoy working with you. I like to think that we can help you aspire to greater things. And I know from all the times we've talked, I want to just point this out. Whenever I start a meeting, I usually ask why people run for the school board. In many places, I want to do it because I got a great education in my hometown and I want to give back. What I've heard here time and time again is we can't keep doing the stuff we've been doing to our kids and I want to make it better. So there's a greater sense of urgency, I think, for you. And you feel it and you really are committed to doing something about it. And so I feel really good that I can, in some small way, help you do that.
Great. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Ms. Caruso. Thank you.
And I'm Jody Goller. I was a public school educator. I taught. I was taught English for many years, and I was a director of English, assistant principal, assistant superintendent. I finished my last 12 years in education as a superintendent. Worked for several different boards, and through my relationship with my boards, I really understood how important boards of education are, and just valued the leadership boards provide in our state. And K was always an organization that, as a superintendent, I relied on heavily in policy work and governance work, and thrilled to be at K now for two and a half years.
Great. Thank you, Jody. So I apologize that you've been asked this question before, but I think it never hurts to sort of continually remind ourselves about our why we do this work, why we serve. And what I find with boards of education in particular, maybe you do too, is that often people run for reasons while they're campaigning. They say, this is why I'm running, this is what I hope to accomplish. And sometimes they find out that the job is different than they might have thought it is. And you learn what the roles and responsibilities are of a board member, and perhaps more importantly, what they aren't. And sometimes you find out that things you may have run on are not things that are within your purview to change. Now, that all being said, you know that one of the most important jobs you have is to hire and evaluate and support the superintendent. And it is that person's job to carry out many of those things. So sometimes people run because they want to improve special education, or they want to change what is being taught in the classroom, or how classrooms are taught, or whatever those things may be that are very much someone else's job. And I'm sure a big part of your training has been learning what is your lane, or what are your lanes, and what are the lanes of Dr. Avery and his team. And sometimes those things make us think differently about the role of board members. We're going to talk a lot more about that tonight as well. Okay. So told you I'd tell you a bit about myself. And I say this in part so you understand sort of the lens that I approach this work, where I'm coming from and my experience that I'm bringing to the table and sharing with you. So I'll try to be as brief as I can. I will tell you that throughout my life, what I've been most passionate about is all things to do with words. Writing, language, reading, communication is a very natural place for me to land because it's what I'm passionate about. Perhaps other kids were playing football in the street. I was in the basement creating my own newspaper. So that's the level of nerd we're talking about here. And I have carried that throughout my whole life. I think in part because I'm very passionate about storytelling. And I believe that a lot of this work is about telling stories well. And we're going to come back to that theme often tonight as well. After graduate school, I went to school, got degrees in writing and English. After graduate school, my first job was working for the mayor of Boston. Now we're talking sort of mid 90s here. I worked for then Mayor Tom Menino. Some of you may remember that name from being mayor of Boston for a long time. I was a speechwriter and a policy associate. And I got to learn a lot about what communication looks like in municipal government. After about 3 years of that, I wanted to make a change, but stay in the administration. So I asked the mayor if I could become more involved in the schools. And at the time, the mayor was really staking a lot of his tenure as mayor on improving the schools. You may know something about Boston Public Schools. We have a very rocky, complicated history, certainly in the national spotlight during desegregation, or busing, as often called in Boston in the 70s, very turbulent times. And to some extent, the sort of scars from everyone involved from those years are very much alive and well. Still a lot of mistrust. We're going to come back to that as well. But I was becoming more and more passionate about the work that the mayor and his team were doing in schools. So I asked him if I could move over to the school department, as we called it. What's a little different about Boston, as you may know, is that as of 1991, the mayor actually appoints the school board. We call it the school committee. Whereas they're elected most places in Boston, the mayor appoints that body based on nominations that come from the community. Okay, so he agreed to let me go across the street and work for the Boston School Committee. I'm going to share some stories with you about that experience in a moment.
Chris,
Yeah.
I just want to point out that this board is partially elected and partially appointed.
Oh, I didn't
No.
know that.
Hybrid.
No,
No, that's
no,
I thought it was.
no, we in fact had a fight about it. And
You're bully-
that fight to maintain the elected,
Okay.
the elected,
We, just to clarify, we have some appointed board members because of resignations.
right?
Okay,
Everybody's
Oh, I
elected,
see.
or,
okay,
There's a, once,
my mistake.
someone steps
When
down, there's
the vacancy occurs, the board.
and,
And the board of,
okay.
Great.
And since we paused for a minute, Ms. Baptiste Perez has also joined the call, so she,
Oh, great, thank you. That's a member.
yes,
Do you want to, hi, Ms. Baptista?
Ms. Baptiste Perez.
Baptiste Perez. If I could just ask you briefly, we started with introductions. If I could ask you to tell us your name, how long you've been on the board, and very briefly, why you chose to run for this office. Is your microphone on? Can you see her window?
If the microphone's muted, I know if she can, she's not on the screen.
Somebody was.
We can come back, yeah.
Okay. Great. So what was this? Oh, so thank you for clarifying that about elected versus appointed. I will say also, this is a moving feast in Boston right now because there was also a vote recently non-binding vote to ask people in Boston whether they wanted to go back to an elected school committee. The people said they would like to, but it has to go through other processes, including the mayor asking the city council to approve it and going to the legislature. It's very complicated, and that process has not yet begun. So as of now, we are still an appointed board, but that could change. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I worked at BPS for about 12 years in various roles. I started by working for the board itself. I'm working for the Boston School Committee. Then I worked for a couple of different superintendents as chief of staff. And my favorite of the jobs was I got to be the district's first chief communications officer, where I got to really sort of reinvent the communications function for the district and shift us from a much more reactive mode, where we're constantly putting out flyers and playing defense, to a much more proactive role of trying to tell our story better, get out good news, get people to understand what we were working on, and so on. I left that job in 2010, and for the past 15 years, I've been working as a consultant almost entirely in K-12 education, on all things communications. So I work primarily with school districts and educational nonprofits and associations like CABE and their counterparts in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, other places, superintendents, school boards, and so on. Again, on crisis communication, on messaging, on working with the press, community engagement, anything to do with communication, sort of big, fun bucket to be in. All right, that's me in a nutshell. But I want to dive a little deeper now. I told you I'm a storyteller. So I'm going to tell you a story about those early years working for the Boston School Committee. I mentioned that the mayor was appointing the school board. And in '98, he had been mayor for about 5 years. Tom Menino had been mayor for about 5 years. And he was really confident that we were making good progress in the schools. He had conducted a national search with the school committee to find our superintendent and found a renowned educator named Tom Payson, who agreed to come to Boston and stay as long as you would have him to really turn things around. A dynamic board chair with lots of experience in nonprofit and public boards agreed to be the chairperson. The schools were really starting to improve. There was investment in facilities. Good things were happening, but the mayor said, our reputation's not catching up. People are still stuck in the notion of what Boston Public Schools were many years ago. We are far from perfect. We're not where we want to be. In fact, we're far from it. But we need people to understand where we're going and where we are now. So I was excited to join the team to work specifically with the Boston School Committee to help sort of tell those stories better. I want to give you an idea of some of the things that we were struggling with as a board. Now, I bring this up tonight because I think there may be some parallels, but I don't want to suggest that this is a perfect parallel by any means. So if things resonate with you and it sounds like it applies to Bridgeport, great. Some other things may not, that's okay too. But I don't want you to think this is sort of a one-for-one comparison. Some of the things that we were challenged with in terms of the school board. Again, I feel like the mayor had appointed 7 really strong people. They came from different sectors. We had people from higher ed, people with expertise in early childhood, people with backgrounds in business and finance, and right on down the line, a really capable board. But most of them had never served on a board before, and certainly not a big public board like the school committee. So we had some work to do to get them sort of up to speed, just as you are, on roles, responsibilities, that sort of thing. Some other challenges we were facing, as I mentioned, just pervasive mistrust of the school district and its leaders that predated these individuals and the superintendent, just old baggage that people had. I won't go into too much detail about the drama, but under the 13-member elected committee, by all accounts, it was pretty much pandemonium. Things really went south, and there were huge budget deficits, lots of infighting on the board, lots of screaming matches, board meetings that often resulted in assaults. No one was proud of what was going on. And that was part of the reason the public finally said enough of this, moving from that 13-member elected board to 7-member appointed board. Okay. So that mistrust stuck around. The board historically had been perceived as ineffective or irrelevant. Nobody knew what the board's role was. And whatever it was, they must not have been doing it well because the schools were not improving, or so people thought. Certainly, once we moved to an appointed board, part of the challenge was that these folks had not run for their seats. They'd not been out campaigning or fundraising or doing any of the stuff that presumably all of you had to do. So a lot of you did not even know who the board members were. not just their names or their faces, but what's their background, what are their qualifications? Why should I believe that they are right for this role? A lack of coherence within the board. So again, as I said, people came from all different sectors, lots of different backgrounds, and never having served on a board of education before, they didn't quite know what their role was. So people came at the job very differently. And the chairperson in particular, who I have the highest regard for, did a lot of great work to try to get people to understand what their roles were and how they could work together most effectively. Similarly, there was a lack of alignment between the board and the administration. A lot of our early work was getting those ducks in a row, getting people to understand not just what their role was, and what the administration's role was, but how do we get those to complement one another? Add to the mix the third leg in our little stool being the mayor's office, who's very, very involved. So how do those three entities, the mayor, school committee, and the superintendent, his or her team, work together and stay in their lanes to get this job done? Those were our challenges. And I loved this challenge, or these challenges, because the work to me was very clear what we had to do. We had to go out and start telling the story about who this board is, who they are as individuals and who they are as a body, what they've been charged to do, and how they're going to do it. So you take all these challenges and you just turn them around and you say, okay, how do we build trust? How do we change the perception and make people understand that the sport is going to be effective and relevant? How do we get them out there and get them known in the community? How do we promote coherence? How do we create alignment between the board and the administration? Big tasks. Some of these are specific to communications and some are more about sort of the team dynamics. And luckily, as I said, we had a chair who was very committed to and very skilled in both of those. Okay. So now we're ready to go out and communicate with the community about this board, the school committee. What is it that we want to tell them? What are the stories we want to tell? What are the messages we want to share and really make pervasive throughout the community? So here, while we're talking about roles and responsibilities, give you your little first pop quiz based on all that you've learned over the past 5 sessions and presumably before then. What are those roles and responsibilities? Is they're not that different in Massachusetts than they are here in Connecticut. A lot of overlap. So just blurt them out. What are some of the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Ed?
Hire and evaluate the superintendent.
Hire and evaluate the superintendent. Really important one.
Set forth policies.
What was the first part?
Set forth policies.
Set forth policies. Great. 2 big ones. What else? Like Family Feud. Show me.
Create a budget.
What is it?
Create a budget.
No.
Create a budget. Fiscal oversight, right?
Adopt.
Jennifer, is that what you say?
I was gonna say adopt a budget.
Adopt a budget. Yes, all those financial stewardship pieces. What else? We got 4 of the big ones, a couple more.
Curriculum.
Curriculum. How much, I don't know as much about it varies in math. How much involvement do you all have in curriculum? Do you actually adopt curriculum for each subject area? No.
I don't think we adopted. I mean, in my experience and being a parent also, the superintendent set forth and then it comes to the board to approve what curriculum and things like that. So I think it's more the superintendent than
I
us.
agree that consistent with.
And it's brought forth, everything's brought forth for us approval from textbooks, new curriculum adoptions, new programs. It's got to come before us for
Part
approval.
of the adoption of the budget, all those things should be responsible of the superintendent and then paid for through the means of the budget that was adopted.
Absolutely. I think that's probably why I'd say it's sort of a gray area, not gray area, but I think there's some ambiguity in math at least. Because of that, it's not as if the board says, oh, I think in 7th grade, the math curriculum should look like this. That's way too much in the weeds, right? What are other responsibilities of the board that we haven't mentioned yet? We talked about, oh, I just gave one away.
I
big
think
one.
one of the things is the progression of the goals to the community of where the district stands, and that should come from the board based on the data that superintendent is giving them. Standing in front of that, and when you tell your story, that's who's telling the story, because this is where we are, and this is part of the why we're here, is making sure that progress is being presented to the community, as a board in whole.
Absolutely. So that's certainly probably one of the most important roles that you all have. And I would argue that that is very much done usually in concert with the superintendent and the community of setting that district direction, vision, mission. Where are we going? What are our goals? What's the overall direction here? Not necessarily how we're going to get there in every school, because that's the superintendent's job, but just what do we agree is our shared sense of purpose here and how are we going to measure our success toward those goals? Great. So that's one piece. You mentioned fiscal oversight, the superintendent hiring and evaluation, policy. The only other one I would throw in is collective bargaining. And again, in Mass, at least different boards get involved in different levels with contract negotiations with employee groups, but it's certainly an important piece of the puzzle. Okay. So as we thought about what we wanted to go out and tell in terms of stories to the community about the Boston School Committee, we said, well, if these are the jobs we've been tasked to do, let's go talk about these jobs. What are we doing in these areas? Partially to get people to understand what our job is and what it isn't, but also to get people to understand where we are in each of these 5 topics and where we are going. And they were at different points of progression. That's okay. So for example, district vision and mission. The superintendent and the school board worked together to develop our 5-year strategic plan called Focus on Children. And together, we communicated about that a lot. What are our objectives in this plan? What are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish? All that good stuff. And the superintendent and his team put the meat on the bones. That wasn't the school committee's job to say, how are we going to get there? That was the administration's job. All that, the goals and the plan were a big part of our content, our messages in this communication, right? Same for the fiscal oversight, a big piece of the puzzle. So we recognize that the board historically had not done a great job of getting the public to understand how this all works. What the heck is our budget besides this enormous number? What's in there? How do we get there? How do we decide what school X gets and what school Y gets? What are the formulas behind all that without getting too far into the weeds? What's the process by which the budget is created? What flexibility do individual schools have in terms of discretionary funds? Those kinds of things that parents wanted to know. Another huge piece of the puzzle in terms of the budget, of course, is facilities. And while it's not the school board's job to go build the schools, it is their job to allocate the resources to make those construction projects possible, right? So we were doing a lot of that at the time too, trying to turn around 125 buildings, most of which were very old and some of them very dilapidated. So the school community was really trying to invest in facilities, as I know you are here, as we can see from this gorgeous building that we're in. Other examples on the policy side, really important. The school committee recognized that some of our policies were extremely outdated and not working in schools. So they took on a few big ones that were very controversial, but they recognized had to be done to build a strong foundation. So a promotion policy, for example, there was a sense that our promotion policy was so weak that kids were just getting passed from one grade to another simply by showing up. And they wanted to adopt more rigor. So rather controversial, a long, arduous process, but we got a more strict promotion policy that said we need kids to demonstrate that they're ready to move from 7th grade to 8th and so on. Same for student assignment, which is sort of our intra-district school choice program, code of conduct, other really big policies they tackled in a matter of a few years because they had to get done in order to lay the foundation for the superintendent to do his job well. That all make sense? With me so far? Awesome. Okay, those were our messages. What were some of the strategies? How are we going to get these messages out? How are we going to engage the community and try to tell these stories? Well, we had a few different strategies in place. I'm just going to name a few. One, it's really important, and that's integration with the district communications. So my job as the staff director, essentially for the school committee, was to think very much about the messaging and the communications for the school committee itself. But it was important that I didn't do that as an island. We had a communications department, just as you do, with John and Tim. So it was really important that we worked hand in hand together so that I could work with my counterpart in that office to make sure that we were telling the same story. And I was just helping to amplify the school committee piece of that puzzle. Okay. And conversely, she knew, my counterpart, that part of her responsibility in telling the district story was to be more intentional about telling the board's story as part of that. That there was no way to tell the story of the Boston Public Schools without also sort of saying what the board's role is, who they are, and amplifying stories like important policy changes, budget process, and so on. So it was very much not about separate, but aligned strategies and communications. And that's still true today. We're going to talk later about sort of websites, but that was a big piece of the puzzle too. We know that people go to websites to learn about things they don't understand. And our website was doing a terrible job of describing who our board is, what they do, what they don't do, and so on. So a lot of the work was about changing that content. We created a new newsletter specifically about the board, not about the district's work, but about what the board was up to. We created a VIP letter for the community leaders. Excuse me. This was our board chair's idea. I thought it was rather brilliant. She pulled together maybe 100 names, leaders from business communities, higher ed, nonprofit, human services, elected officials, you name it. And she said, every other month, the superintendent and I are going to co-sign a letter to those 100 VIPs. And that letter is going to be about one topic that we think is important. And maybe it was something going on like the budget or one of these policies I described or the district vision. But she wanted to make sure that those 100 people who are movers and shakers and influencers had a different narrative than perhaps they were reading in the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald about what the heck was going on over at BPS. I thought it was a rather brilliant strategy because they then would go tell those stories to their constituents in whatever sector they operated. Not a lot of work, but I think a big payoff for that one. We wanted to, as I said, people didn't necessarily know who our school board members were. So we said, we've got to get you out in the community. So we developed a schedule and made sure that everyone saw part of their job as being out and about. So we would get invitations in the school committee office to attend the play at this school or the potluck at that school or parent night. And typically the same two people on the board would go to everything. They were great about it. But we said, we've got to divide and conquer here. So we set an expectation that all 7 members were going to sign up to participate in different things in the community, whether in schools or actually in the community too. And get them out there to describe not just themselves, but the board's work and what was going on in the district, being much more intentional about their visibility. And then I want to share with you some things we did to really think differently about board meetings. And again, I got to give the chair all the credit for this because she really had a powerful vision. As I said, Boston School Committee meetings had a rather horrific reputation for being a 3-ring circus, not being terribly welcoming to the public, not being terribly effective or efficient, just a lot of screaming, not a lot of good decision-making going on. And the chair did a lot of great work behind the scenes to change that culture and to help members understand what a good meeting looked like. She ran a tight ship. And meetings got better and better, but she also said, let's make sure the public feels welcome here. This can be an intimidating thing, as you may know, maybe less so now because you're on the board, but maybe you remember as a parent coming to these things and not knowing what this agenda means, what the heck they're talking about some of the times, how any of it works, how decisions get made. So we want to be a lot more transparent about that and also a lot more welcoming to make sure that people knew that these were their meetings and they could feel welcome to come and learn or observe, and in some cases speak or testify if they felt comfortable. We did some work, first of all, just on the school committee chamber. As superficial as that may sound, it was not a very welcoming place. It was a rather dark, depressing room with old broken chairs, not a good sound system, not the kind of place where you would say, wow, this is a really sharp, state-of-the-art kind of group. So not a lot of money, but a little bit of investment to make that feel more comfortable, more welcoming, and more sort of professional. I think that was sort of the bottom line for a lot of this work. Also, we produced this simple booklet that I'll pass around, simply called Welcome to a Meeting of the Boston School Committee. Again, not a big investment here, talking about a little booklet, but it accomplished or attempted to accomplish a lot of what I described to you. Yes, it was about the meeting itself. So you'll see in here a description of how do these meetings work? What does each item on the agenda look like? How does public comment work? What are the rules? It felt like as they were sitting there waiting for the meeting to start, they could flip through this and say, oh, okay, I know I have 30 seconds. I know I can submit testimony, stuff that you wouldn't know if you just showed up, right? The meeting schedule, those kinds of things, but also member bios. As silly as it sounds, who are these 7 people in front of me who are having this debate and the superintendent? So just by having their photos and a little bio, it sounds like a small thing. It went a long way in people sort of understanding at least who these people were. Otherwise, they would have just seen a conversation and known only their name and face. Not what they do during the day, not what skills they bring to the table, but just those suits up there. Small effort, but I think the optics of it are also important. You'll see it in the one I pass around. Questions about any of those strategies that I just outlined really quickly? Again, that's the tip of the iceberg. We did so many different things, but I thought those might be a good sort of indication of flavor of the work we were doing. Questions about any of those steps?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yeah.
It's just, I laughed. I'm sorry if I laughed because you showed the book and that's very nice. But right now with the situation we're going, that costs money because we are under the budget. But all this information, the bio and pictures we have in the website. I know they're working with that, so we have the picture and little, and they're gonna have a bio, who's
On the
who
new website.
in the website. And much
Great.
better for parents to go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, keep in mind, we're talking about the 1990s here, so we're not cutting edge of technology.
Yeah.
So I think now you could even for people who are at the meeting, even having a QR code to that page so that they know that if they're
Oh, yeah.
sitting there waiting there, they can read about.
You go.
You don't want to have
Have a U
paper copies.
Yes.
Of course, we have
Yeah.
translated interpreters at the meeting. All of that stuff is very important too. But your point is well taken. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you.
Other comments, questions about any of those strategies? Okay. Questions, comments about anything I've told you about Boston? I know I gave you sort of a really quick rundown of a rather complex history.
I just started taking some of those, and I think out of the 5 points, 4 of them were mirror image of what's in Bridgeport. You know,
Which one stuck
when you
out for you?
talk about old baggage,
Mm.
they haven't stopped talking about it. You know, this board, when I became a member of this board, we were looking at 6 new members, but they were still being categorized as the board from 5, 6 even years ago. Board perceivement, how they perceived it. They were saying that, say the same thing, ineffective and irrelevant. It was like we wasn't known to doing the right thing because there was so much chaos, lack of board coherence. We wasn't together last year until this year, now that we have more work being done together. And even, I would say, even the alignment with the board and the administration. It was a big, understanding, especially last year, not so much this year, more last year was very obvious. This year is very minimum, let's say, if not, there. But yeah, so it was almost like a mirror. I was like, okay.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, I don't claim to know much about this board or this district by any means. I've tried to give myself a crash course over the last few weeks and months, I guess. As I said, and with a lot of help from Jody and Nick. But even from what I've read, that some of that shines through that you described, Mr. Medina, of, people, all of you, or some of you anyway, acknowledging the progress in those areas.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to slightly disagree with my colleague over here. We are seen that way in a long time, but just for an example, I'm the longest serving. I'm the only one sitting here that's made budget cuts in the past. My first 2 years, we made budget cuts. The community came out there and attacked us. They did not understand that we can only spend the money that we got. But we've done such a good job communicating that even when we went to the Capitol to advocate, they came up with us, people that we had to vote to eliminate came and spoke to me and introduced themselves to me. Hi, I'm a librarian. Yes, I'm like, I'm sorry. We had to eliminate these positions due to the budget cuts. Hopefully we can get more money. And it was very cordial conversations. In 2017, that was not happening. So we have done a better job of communicating.
Sounds like you do agree.
Public.
Sounds like you're saying there's
Yeah, yes.
progress. Yeah,
No, but I think we made it a little bit more.
that's great. And I want to clarify too, what I said about people having some baggage from the past. That's not just, some of that is very legitimate, because I said, there were huge issues in the 70s where it all came to a head in terms of busing, in terms of particularly the racial tension in Boston. And at the time, very much sort of a Black community and the white community in very separate schools, and the white schools typically having more investments, better results, and the schools primarily attended by Black children, being in poorer neighborhoods and less high quality facilities and not as strong outcomes. So people said, yeah, busing may be over, although we were still certainly desegregating, and that may be ancient history, but people said there are still some of those inequities, and some of that racial tension still exists because some of those disparities still exist. So it's not wrong to be carrying some of that around if part of your reason for being on the board or being an advocate is because you believe that we haven't solved those problems yet, as no district had. So, okay, I'm going to move us along. But I want to share with you, I think, one of the lessons that I took away from that period and that has really carried me through all of my work. And that is this. If you don't tell your story, what's the rest of this sentence?
Someone else will.
Oh my God.
Someone else will, right? So to me, it's not about sort of saying, we're gonna be the only ones telling this story. People are always gonna be telling their version of your story. My advice is just making sure that you are getting your version out there, and telling it so well that it has credibility. Okay? So a lot of what I'm gonna share with you tonight is about this. It's about helping you do a better job of telling your story all day, every day, in as many different ways as you can. All right. I want to sort of pan out a little bit from Boston, from Bridgeport, and look at some national data. A couple of different polls, just to give you some context and to make you feel perhaps a little bit less alone in all this. The first poll is a poll that the Gallup organization has been doing for 25 years. And what they do is they talk to about 1,000, they poll about 1,000 Americans about a lot of different issues, not just education, but education and security and the economy and healthcare, whatever it may be, and to rank their sort of satisfaction with each of those sectors, if you will. So this chart is probably hard to read, but I can sort of walk you through it. Starting in 2001, right up through 2025, asking people about their satisfaction with the schools. Okay, they asked them, how would you describe the quality of public education in the nation? Not in your town. This is not specific to the community that you were in, if you were polled, but just overall, the nation's public schools. And what we see is, you can see that red and yellow section growing over time. Back in 2001, it was here, and it's growing and growing and growing. By 2025, 73% of the respondents were either somewhat dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with the quality of public education in the United States. You can see the green on the far left, very satisfied, remains kind of flat. People who feel like the quality of education are very satisfied didn't change much in those 25 years. What did change is the rise in people feeling more and more dissatisfied with our schools. Very sobering, right? Another poll, this one out of a conservative think tank called the Pacific Research Institute. Not over time, but just a snapshot in time. In this case, September of 2024. The one question they asked, how would you rate the overall performance of each of the following? Now, this one is about your district. So they asked an individual, tell me about how you would rate the quality of the schools in your district and the school board in your district. Aha, now we're getting to it. So they're not just rating the schools, but how are the folks who are governing those schools doing? In September 2024, 52% of voters rated their local public schools as excellent or good. So only a little more than half said excellent or good about the schools themselves. Local school board, not quite as positive, 41%. Only 4 out of 10 people said, my local school board is excellent or good. More than half rated them fair or poor. So first, let's look at the local schools ratings. You can see here how that shakes out. And here we get the breakdown, not just of the overall, but how do we compare those results among people who have kids and people who don't have kids? Encouragingly, people who have kids, people who are actually experiencing the schools, have a higher sense of satisfaction and a higher sense of the quality of the schools that their kids attend than people who don't have kids. So that I think is encouraging. How about if we shift to the school board again? So again, look over here. These percentages of people who rate the board itself excellent or good in their community.
And again,
Not very strong numbers, right? Again, a little bit higher among those who have kids than those who don't have kids in the schools. So that's positive. But I say all this not to depress you, but to see that we have our work to do. And this, again, is why I believe so strongly in sort of focusing on public perception and satisfaction, because I believe that is an indicator of the work that we're doing. Not that we're going to work only on people's satisfaction or perception. We got to do the work, and hopefully doing the work well will improve those perceptions and satisfaction rates, right? That all make, sorry, Sam. Does that all make sense? Questions or comments about any of those polls I just shared? Yes. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Jim. We'll start with
Robert,
you.
I think he's pointing to you.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. The sun sets in my eye.
Sorry.
Yeah, we fixed that problem. That was at the height of the dysfunction. So when the school district opened, and 1.5 weeks into the school year changed its schedule.
I'm not sure I'm following you, sorry.
Well, you're talking about September 24.
It's not your district.
Oh, I thought you said it was our.
I'm sorry, no, this is a national poll where people were asked about their district.
Oh,
I probably
I misunderstood you. when
Sorry,
you
no, this
said
is not Bridgeport.
this is about your district.
Meaning like if I was surveyed,
And I'm going, oh, okay, well, that is interesting.
I'm so sorry.
But
One question
at
had
the
to
height
do
of
with
our
rating the
district.
national public schools. The second question had to do with
Yes.
rate your own
So someone in
district.
Kansas.
Okay,
Reading their.
I got you.
Sorry for that. I'm being-
No, I misunderstood you.
Yeah.
I said this is people rating your district.
I think I phrased it poorly.
Yeah, that could reflect our district, but I think it's interesting that people who actually experience the school district who have a more favorable opinion, and that's because I think the people outside the school district, they're responding to sound bites. And newspapers and news organizations, they sell ads. And a National Scholar or a spelling bee winner doesn't create the same ad as school board goes at each other's throat.
Fair enough. And we're really going to talk about that sort of disparity too. I just want to be clear. Yes, the numbers are a little bit better for people who have kids, but these are not numbers to celebrate either. If
No.
even people who have kids are saying only 48% of them think that you in general are doing an excellent or good job. So that's, I'd say incrementally better. Okay. All right. Now I want to put you to work. We're going to do a little small group exercise to sort of unpack this a little bit and get sort of a little bit stronger sense of how people form these.
Before you go to
Sorry,
that,
yes.
I've been listening to your Gallup poll through the last poll. And there is a national debate. You're obviously, even what you've done, familiar with the national debate about public education that's been going on for 3 or 4 decades, but certainly starting in the 90s, that led to No Child Left Behind being created after the turn of the century, that led to Race to the Top, that has affected. And it's the debate about privatization of public education, the fight over privatization of public, I mean, that colors all of this. And as I've listened to you with the Gallup poll and with that debate colors all of this.
Absolutely.
Whether privatizing helps, whether it doesn't help, whether there's a problem or not a problem, whether public education is good or a problem or problematic, that all of that narrative and how you spin that story, as you said, is influenced by that.
Well, but
Okay,
we are going to get to that very.
okay, all right.
You all.
I'll leave it at that.
No, it's a great. And I would argue that I'm sort of being careful about not trying to speculate about why those numbers change. I think that's one good theory. I think there may be others about how has our culture changed and our narratives changed at the national level that may influence people's perception, whether that reality matches the perception or not. And some of these results, you can take a close look at the Gallup results or the Pacific one. Actually break it down in some cases by party affiliation or by age or gender or race. I forget the exact breakdowns, but that may give you some all different lenses too on what skews people's opinion one way or the other. So perfect lead into this work. I want to break you into small groups to engage in a short exercise to look at this very question of how perception is shifted or is formed. So what I want you to do in the small groups is ask yourselves this question. What factors influence public opinion and perception about any school district? Not just yours, any school district. What is that list of things that shapes and influences whether people say this is a great school district or a terrible school district or somewhere in between? Now, I want you to think about all of the constituents that make up the court of public opinion in this case. So obviously there's the families, the students you serve, the staff who work for you. But tell me who else? Who else is in that ecosystem? Who else are the constituents you need to be thinking about in the broader sense of the word? Who else has opinions about our schools?
Public officials.
Public officials. Who else?
Faith-based community.
Yeah, faith-based, any of those communities, faith-based, higher ed, business communities.
Is this the small groups or do you want
We're
to have this
going to setting the stage for the small groups, but I'm asking you, not just who else are the
universities and colleges?
Yeah, universities and colleges. Who else is looking into the quality of schools? Perhaps shopping around
Parents,
for schools,
parents.
prospective parents, right?
Yep.
So whether it's you've got a 3-year-old and you've got to decide,
Real estate?
I already live in Bridgeport. Do I want to stay here? Do I want to move? Or do I want to send my kid to the public schools or somewhere else? What did you say, sir?
Real estate?
Realtors, right? We could have a whole session just about that. Their ability to tell people, oh, this is a great district or this is not. When I was shopping around for a condo in Boston, I was already working for the district. And I purposely didn't tell my realtor what I did for a living. And I asked him that question and he started trashing the schools. And I was like, we got work to do. And he didn't know anything. He was making it up. He told me later.
Right.
Not good. So who else? Who else is shopping around besides parents?
Businesses.
We're funders, right? People can spend their money lots of different places and we want them to choose this, but they're shopping around saying, the place I really want to write a check. Who else? Big group out there.
What you're talking about businesses in terms of people selling product or people who are looking to establish where they build.
News media.
Could be
Either one,
Either
right?
for employers for that.
Anyone want to do business in the
Right.
city?
News media.
I'm thinking both of them.
And just
Stories.
point out employers, because if they have a big question about
Right.
how's the quality of the graduates you're producing,
Right.
I want to hire these
Right.
kids. Media, is another audience too. Who else? Did you say something, Dr. Rick?
I think I just repeated media.
Teachers?
Teacher, staff, right? So yes, we talked about the people you already have, people who already work for you. We know what a competitive market this is, right? Not just for teachers, for principals, for custodians, for paraprofessionals. For school secretary. All I hear everywhere I go is it's tough out there. We are having a hard time filling positions.
Oh,
So
yeah.
guess what? It's a buyer's market.
Yeah.
So if I'm a teacher, especially in a hard to fill area, I get to shop around and I'm going to check out Bridgeport and whoever else is neighboring you to say, maybe I get to pick where I get to work. What's the quality there? Why should I choose Bridgeport over some of the competitors? And that's not always been the case, but it certainly is now. So that's another part of the constituents. Okay, so that's the assignment. What are the factors? Just get a good long list.
I had something to include on that last question.
Please, yes.
Yeah, test scores.
Okay.
I feel like the test scores definitely influence public opinion and perception about a school district.
Awesome.
Particularly reading and math.
Great. So I probably made this a little bit confusing. What we were doing first was just brainstorming. Who are the people we're talking about? Who are the audiences? Who are the people deciding what the quality of public opinion is? The quality of the public schools are? Now we're going to shift into exactly what you're doing and come up with some of the factors that influence what people think about the quality of the public schools. So test scores is one. In your small groups, I want you to get as many of those things down as you can. And on each of those factors, how much control does the Board of Ed have over this factor on a scale of 1 to 5? So if you think the Board of Ed has absolutely no control whatsoever over that factor, you would give it a 1. If you think you have a lot of control over that factor, you would give it a 5. Oh, sorry. Or somewhere in between.
Stop.
So for example, the example your colleague just shared, test scores. It's complicated, but you might have a little debate in your group about how much influence does the board have in affecting test scores over time.
That's 0.
Okay. I don't want you to spend a lot of time on any one factor and having really long debates about that, the numbering thing. That's less important than getting as many different things down as you can. Those may be either factors that people consider or ways that people get information. So for example, test scores is one thing. Another thing may be just headlines about the district. That may be about test scores and maybe about anything. How do people get their information and what is that information about? Does everyone understand the assignment?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So how many are we? Let's do 3 small groups. Maybe if the 3 of us can sort of move them up, each take a group. Can I get you to count off by 1, 2, 3, starting over here?
1,
2,
3.
1,
2.
1.
3.
This is the easy part. Superintendent.
1.
Okay, great. So can I get the 1s to come over here? The 2s can be at this table and the 3s over here. Folks at home, I don't think there's a way to get them in a group, is there?
No.
So if you don't mind just working individually and jotting down some ideas about these questions you see on the screen. Jot down as many factors as you can think of. And for each your scale of 1 to 5, what is the influence of the board? We need a little worksheet that you can use in your small groups. Let's take about 7 minutes. With some ideas. Those are the ones. That's all for you. Thank you. Good. You gonna take the two?
All right. I'm just gonna write down what it.
Let's spend about 7 minutes in this.
No, you can't. I know, we
done.
started talking on some of this stuff and
I
keep
know.
going. I do it.
I put the
So
Yeah.
He added it to it.
it's public.
You know, how can they afford to pay teachers?
Oh, I guess we should.
Sure.
Mhm.
Do we mute them or
Yeah.
Let's be.
just push that center?
I think
All right, we're back on.
I think we're
Going back,
Are we going back?
back to our seats?
Yes, yes. Or, everyone's visible.
Stay where you want.
I'll be the speaker.
Can see better over there,
Okay.
I
probably.
know, right?
I want to hear your list, but here's the thing. I know some of these things are complicated and nuanced, and you may want to sort of explain a lot. I'm gonna ask you just to sort of bang out your lists.
Okay.
No editorializing, just tell me what's on your list, and I'm gonna try to keep up. Ones, you want to start?
We
Sure.
said,
Check.
test, we added in what, Councilman said, but headlines, yeah, headlines.
Tell me your numbers next.
Oh, sorry, we said 4
Okay,
headlines, news headlines. We said 3. We have 2 categories for resources, so resources in terms of what we receive, in terms of money, funding, and that's a 1 or 2 we put. And then in terms of our spending, we have control of that, so 5.
okay.
Add 4.
4, okay, 4 or 5. Board behaviors,
Well, whose behaviors?
board behaviors.
Ah. And that number is?
We said we have control of that, 5,
Yeah.
right? School conditions, facility conditions, a 3,
Conditions meaning,
building condition,
Yeah.
yeah. And then social media misinformation. 2. We said 2, unless we're the ones spreading the misinformation, that's a little higher.
yeah. And just doing the talking, right? Is that your whole list?
Yeah, and then also I just want to point out that Ms. Casimir also has her hand up, so
We're going to come back to them.
that's her, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Is that everybody for the?
That's our list, yeah.
Awesome, good work. How about the twos?
Twos. We got test scores. And between 1 and 2, we didn't agree, so put it at 1.5. Building conditions, we gave it 3. Internet connections, technology, we gave it 3. Staff attitudes, we gave a 5.
Who's attitude?
staff, he said.
Staff attitudes, we gave a 5.
That attitude, what do you mean by that?
Like it's the way staff presents themselves to the children, and
Ah. And you gave that one number what?
we gave that a 5. Because we can model that behavior and create policy around that behavior as well. The press, we had a big disagreement about that. Benahan has
In terms of the number?
between 2 and 4. Building school climate, 4. Bullying and school climate. 4, we agreed. School resources, 1. Board behaviors, 5. Communication, 4. Elected officials, 2. And privateers, 1.
What was the second word?
Private board of officials were 2, elected officials were 2, and the last one is privateers are 1.
Privateers?
Privateers, people seeking to privatize public education.
Elected officials.
That was a 1.
Correct.
Thank you. Good work. And where are the 3?
Got the 3. Test scores, 3. Financials or no finances, 4.
Is that more on the receiving side or the spending side?
Spending side,
Okay.
technology, books and supplies, 5. Bus and transportation, 3. Superintendent and board relationship, 4.
Sorry, one second.
Involvement.
Sorry. Let's present.
I'm talking fast, sorry. Involvement with the superintendent and board in the community,
Well, the superintendent relations, what number?
4. And then involvement with the superintendent and board in the community, 5.
Great. Okay, let's go to our friends online. We'd like to go first. You want to call them out, Jen? You can press.
I just see Ms. Casimir's hand.
Yeah, let me take it down. Yeah, so they wanted me to be the speaker for the group. The 3 of us that are online, we're actually in a chat group together. And that's
Word.
how we came up with our answers. So test scores is a 4. The headlines, newspaper headlines, sound bites, a 1. Racial composition of teachers, 3. Racial composition of students, 1. Racial composition of administration, 3. Economic opportunity in the city, 3. Yeah, and how the city is viewed by, oh, excuse me, how the mayor of the city is viewed by the majority of city residents. We feel like that factors into the influence of public opinion, and that would pretty much be 1. I mean, individual, we don't have individual control, but collectively, voting the person in, of course, but yeah, that's what we have.
Good work. Team online. These are great. You guys did a awesome list. Anything that you're suddenly missed? Got some my own ideas here. What I haven't heard is quality of instruction. Teaching and learning. How much do people actually base their opinions on what we're in the business of doing? That is actually teaching the kids. Thoughts about that? Does that seem like a legitimate?
Yeah.
Yes, the list. What's the board's power over that, if you will? How much control do you have over the quality of teaching in your buildings as a board?
4.
4? How so?
4. I would say 4 to 5.
How so, as a board, what levers does the board pull to make the quality of instruction better?
Well,
For me,
insofar as we have oversight of what the superintendent presents to us and approval of what the superintendent presents to us, we should have a 4. Wasn't necessarily the case in the past year, but that should be.
Yeah, I think that's, yes, please.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic because there's a lot of factors that are control, that are beyond our control. We cannot have a stake education on a hamburger budget.
Well, that's fair. And I think that's,
Classrooms, lack of instructional resources. Prior to the pandemic, we didn't have resources for computers and our students had like 1-to-5 ratio.
yeah, I think you're right. There's outside influences for sure. Part of me is wondering if the reason that didn't come up in any of your groups, the quality of instruction, is because that is the whole enchilada, right? That is what we're all about.
Compass.
The fight.
If you pull all your levers and you adopt the right policies and you get all the resources you need and you expend them well and you hire the right superintendent and he in turn hires all the right principals and that person hires all the best teachers that they can find and the curriculum's strong and the facilities are up to date, then all of that should lead to the heart of the matter, classroom instruction, right? That was the lesson we got from my first superintendent in Boston. Everyone is in the business of improved teaching and learning. I don't care if you're a bus driver, a communications director, a teacher, a school board member. Our job is to figure out what the classroom needs from us to do their job better. Briefly.
Which is why we split the resources
Yeah.
from receiving and spending. If we don't get them,
Yes.
that's the problem.
You can only work with what you
And
get.
that's been the problem
Yeah.
for decades, is we're not getting the resources.
Yes. And you guys are out there fighting for more, which is awesome. All right, some other things. Extracurriculars. What I didn't hear is, especially parents, they're not just saying how good is the calculus program or the social studies, but how many sports do you offer?
Football.
How good are those teams? Are they well resourced? Can my kid who loves to dance get on stage as their performing arts? Debate club, all this other stuff, all the other stuff that kids want to do. Does my district?
Ouch, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it sounded like you were making a list of cuts.
Oh, jeez.
So it
Again,
goes.
touched on it with climate and bullying, but I think just safety in general is a huge concern for a lot of people. About, and one of the ways they measure the quality of schools is how safe is my kid or someone else's kid going to be. Other outcomes besides test scores, I think there's lots of different ways we measure outcomes, graduation rates, and lots of other things that are not necessarily just about the tests. Thing that comes up when I do this exercise sometimes is just those crazy ranking systems that some folks put a lot of stock in. The 10 best school districts in Connecticut, 15 best high schools in Massachusetts, the 100 best schools in the country. I happen to think a lot of those are not great indicators, but some people certainly hang their hat on them. We covered a lot of the other ones.
We're in the urban areas that wallow at the bottom. That's not where
Exactly.
we'd like to get there, but until we get the resources,
Definitely more of a suburban dynamic, I think.
right?
And then curriculum. I think this is what comes up on a lot of national polls, but I didn't necessarily hear it around your tables about, okay, what's actually being taught in our schools? And is it the stuff I want my kid to be taught, or is there other things that I wish he or she or they were getting? So nice work. Tell me about just sort of quick reactions to this exercise in terms of thinking about the board's role in this and sort of some of these dilemmas about is it 2 or 3 or 4 things you sort of struggled with just sort of philosophically in this exercise that came up in your conversations?
For group 3, as we were jotting down different ideas, everything went back to financials. And kind of what Mr. Draper was just saying, really having the proper funding in order to give our kids proper resources and what they deserve.
Good point. And I would argue, I think that that is true for most things, but I think there are some other things that we have control over that are almost cost neutral. For example, let's see, board behavior.
Mhm.
Relations.
No money there.
Doesn't cost a thing to behave well, right?
No money there.
Some of these other stuff, some things are trickier, and certainly having more resources makes it possible to do other things. I also know some very well-resourced school districts where people are not very satisfied. So money also isn't the answer to all these things. But your point is well taken. Okay, we're gonna shift gears and then take a short break. Good job on this exercise, first of all. And thank you folks online who are participating as well. I mentioned at the outset, different types of communication. A lot of our focus tonight is going to be on the right side of this screen in terms of your communication, collective communication with your constituents. But I also want to just offer a few ideas about the left side of the screen and some of the dynamics between the board, within the board, and between the board and the superintendent, and some things I've learned over the years working with a lot of different district leadership teams, including boards of ed. The first sort of comes from NSBA, who a number of years ago put together their list of the 15 things school board members can do to boost public confidence in public schools. This list has probably evolved over the years, but this is the copy I happen to have. And I'm struck by the ones that they list as the number 1 and number 2 things that school board members can do. And you guys kind of touched on them in your brainstorming. Number 1, show the public what good governance looks like. The NSBA is saying that is the number 1 thing a school board can do to boost public confidence, is to say, we know what good governance looks like, and we're going to model it. That should boost your confidence in our ability to do this job well and to lead the district effectively. Number 2, very similar, model the behavior you want students and staff to emulate, especially during times of conflict. Powerful, right? What's the total cost of these 2 items together? 0. Right. Also, this is not go raise test scores, go double your budget, go whatever those things are. There are much longer games. These are things you can do tonight and tomorrow and every day thereafter. They're immediate. Okay. So this is not me saying this. This is NSBA's, and I think it resonates for me. How much of this resonates with each of you? Right. All right, so let's look at some of those things. First of all, Board of Education meetings. I have said so many times throughout my career that these are business meetings, certainly first and foremost, but they are also communications moments and communications opportunities. And those opportunities can either be used to enhance and strengthen public confidence in the Board of Education and therefore the school district, or they can detract from and undermine and negate public confidence in the board itself and the district you lead. You guys know this, inherently do, but certainly boards sometimes behave in ways at meetings that are not helpful to improving public confidence. So when people tune into these meetings, they do so from home or actually come to the meeting, they, yes, are seeing some things that may or may not help them understand your role. What is it you are debating or discussing? What is it you are voting upon? What do I hear at the meeting about your district goals? Do I hear anything about your district goals? Do I hear anything about the direction of the district? Do I hear anything about your strategic plan? That's all one set of work, is sort of the content, the stuff of the meeting. The other set of stuff that people use to form their opinion about you, and by extension, the district, is how is this group behaving? Who are these people? Do they seem professional? Do they seem civil with one another? Are they asking good questions? Do they seem like they know their stuff? Do they seem like they know the job? How are they treating people who come up for public comment? All of that stuff, I would argue, may even have more influence on perception than that first set of stuff. But both are really important. So certainly think about that. Here's a photo from a school board meeting in Kentucky, a real meeting that ran in the paper. I don't know if I feel like my kid is in good hands. I don't even know who was a board member here, if these are two board members, if one's a parent, one's a board member, doesn't matter. This is not the behavior we want to model for our students to emulate, right? This does not feel like a professional meeting where things are being discussed in a civil and productive way. Tell me what you see in this photo. What dynamic is this?
Playing game.
What is it?
The blame game.
The blame game, finger pointing. I've been guilty of this at times. This might happen within a board, where within a board, two members might say, oh, don't blame me. I voted against that. Blame this one. Or I wasn't around then. This one was around. She's the one to blame for that. Or between the board and the super. And where the lines get drawn, they say, this is not on us. This is on the superintendent, or the superintendent saying, don't look at me. I'm only going to work with what the board gives me. I get it. And sometimes you are going to disagree. But I would argue that no one in the public is going to be impressed by the blame game, or really roll up their sleeve and say, well, let me figure it out. Let me see if the board is right or the super is right. They don't care. They see you guys as one big entity, and they want you to figure it out for the sake of their kid, right? I'll give you an example from my neck of the woods, a town near mine that, like so many districts right now, is just having a very brutal budget year, partially because of inflation and revenue not meeting that inflationary rate, but also there's a sense that there was some mismanagement of the funds. Not in a corrupt way, but just that they could have been managed better, monitored better, whatever it may be. In this community, I happen to know both the school board chair and the superintendent fairly well. And each of them contacted me just sort of unofficially to ask about how to proceed with this growing crisis, particularly the public perception about how this happened and why this happened. And each of them sort of wanted my permission to say, I think we need to go public. I think we need to get up and say, the school board chair saying, don't look at us. The superintendent knew about this crisis months ago and kept it to himself. Superintendent saying to me, I need to go public. I need to tell people that the board is asleep at the wheel, that they weren't doing their job, and don't blame me for this. Guess what my advice was to both of them? Yes.
Don't go public.
Don't go public. You're in this together. The public already knows there's a crisis. What they care least about is probably who's responsible for the crisis. What do they care most about?
Solution.
How are you going to fix the damn thing? Are we going to get out of this? Are you going to lay off a bunch of teachers to close the school, whatever it may be? What I think, and they didn't really need my advice to know this, we had an override vote coming up in this town, meaning that they had to go to the public and ask for a vote in order to increase the budget and get the millions of dollars that needed to prevent all those layoffs and school closures. And they recognized that the blame game was not going to help them with that override. Why? What impact would that sort of bickering have on voters' behavior? Yes.
Voters aren't going to vote for giving you more money if they don't think you're capable of handling the money you got.
The voters aren't going to vote for giving you more money if they don't think you're capable of handling the money you've got. Couldn't have said it better myself. So at the end of the day, if you really care about getting as much money as you can, and the kids, you put aside those differences and the worry about who's going to be blamed for what, and you get the darn thing passed. And they did. And they recognized that they had to present a united front. And what mattered less was who knew what and when, but more about how we're going to fix it. And that they did articulate to the voters. yes, we need to get this override, but here's how we're gonna put different financial controls in. Here's how we're gonna monitor the money better. We're gonna do a better job, but we also need more money. Yes.
Is this a very recent event with the expiration of COVID funds?
Well, that was a factor, but I would say not a huge factor in this case.
Because there's another layer to the blame game that goes outside the board and outside the superintendent, which goes to elected officials who have significantly underfunded our district for decades. And the first thing they want to do is they're not spending money right. They wasted COVID money by putting in jobs that had to be eliminated later because they wanted to give crisis counseling to their children during the event. So they shouldn't have hired these people in the meantime because they knew they were just gonna have to lay them off. They were irresponsible with their money because it couldn't be maintained.
Absolutely.
And that's the narrative that we got, and it's called mismanagement. So if it's mismanagement is spending $1,000 on a pen.
Yes, well,
Office, right.
your point is well taken. And two ways. One, this is not just a budget issue. I could give you
Yeah.
blame game examples about a lot of things. And I worked for people who did a really good job of not engaging in this. And some people who found out the hard way that how the blame game does not pay off in the long run. The other thing being that you're right, the finger pointing extends far beyond this dynamic. And I think that's part of the reason the American public is so frustrated, because all they hear is everyone saying, don't blame me, I'm just the president. Don't blame me, I'm just Congress. Don't blame me, I'm just the governor. Who you need to blame is that one, this one. And people are tired of that, I would say. I'm not getting into politics so much of the political climate that we're in terms of people saying, where the heck does the buck stop? And why does no one say, you know what, this is on me? I worked for a superintendent who was brilliant at that. We had a crisis of late buses that would not go away, chronically late buses. And she could have gotten in front of the media and said, don't blame me, it's the routing software, it's that bus company, it's the drivers, it's the Boston traffic, it's weather. And you know what she said? This is on me, I'm the superintendent. This is happening on my watch, it's unacceptable. Late buses are lost instructional time. I can't stand for it. I will go fix it. That's where the buck stops. Yeah.
I mean, by saying what Mr. Sakava just said, that sounds like playing in the blame game as well. That's, leave it at that, like, by calling out, like, the elected officials saying this, I think that's also us blaming them. I think it continues the narrative. So I think it's just, in terms of communication, changing how we're communicating, the problem, right? If they want to call us out and say it was mismanaged, okay, but us calling them out is us returning that blame. So if we can change the communication that we're sending out to the community, I think that's important,
Yeah.
Instead of, obviously we know that if we got more money from the state but if we change the narrative and say, we can do this with X amount of money, I think that's the piece there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't want to make this sound like,
And I don't want to keep going back and forth with it, but
no, that's okay. But I think you raised a good point in that I'm not saying you could never sort of give people the context of who controls which piece of the puzzle. So for example, I advised a lot of school districts this year about how to talk about your budget crisis.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it was making sure people understood that state funding for schools has done this and your bills have done this. That doesn't mean you're screaming at the governor or the legislature. You're just also putting in context the check that was written to you and what you can do with it. I think that you have to sort of do that and move on and say,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we've done all that we can to fight for the money we have. This is the money we have. Here's how we're going to spend it. So yes, I think that's a real high wire act, but not making it seem like you are blaming someone, but just putting something in context.
Right.
Quick comment.
Yeah, real quick point about that. You highlighted 1 and 2 on the list, but I believe 3 is very important as well, to have the facts and documented, well put out there so people could understand that where not the blame game, the responsibility lies for the lack of.
Part of the responsibility.
Correct.
Yeah. That's always the key. Not this is someone else.
We allocate resources, they provide resources.
Exactly. Yes. Well said. Okay, we're gonna move on to our next tip. What's this woman doing?
It's silent.
Keeping silent. Really quickly, my advice to you and to all my clients and school districts and every organization is don't sit on bad news. I think it's human nature. We have a tendency to think, I'm just going to see if this ever gets out. Or this is gonna get out, but maybe not yet. I'm gonna wait a little while. Or maybe no one's ever gonna, whatever it may be, I always say, you're crazy. If you know they have bad news to deliver, whether it's bad news within the board, whether the superintendent has to tell the board has to tell the superintendent, or you all have to tell the public, I always say, get it out there. Whether it's about some mini scandal
Get it out.
or a big budget problem or something else, we live in the information age. It is going to get out. You have two choices. You can get it out there and break that story, or you can wait around and someone else is going to break it for you. And then the story is both the thing itself and when did you know? Who knew? How much did you know? And why didn't you tell us? Now you've got two firestorms to work with. So I always say, get it out there. Do it early, be widespread about it. Sometimes people say, well, I brought it up at a board meeting. That's great, but not a lot of people watch board meetings. So if you really want your community to know, don't just feel like you were covering your butt, but actually find ways to let people know about something important that you think they need to know so they can't later say, why didn't you tell me? We could have a whole session just about this, but I'm going to move on. Crises, on a similar note. I think the public forms an impression, their reputation, all the stuff we've been talking about during crises in particular. And they look at all of you and they say, how did leadership handle this crisis? The board, the superintendent, I don't care whom. Did they do a good job managing the crisis? Did they do a good job communicating about the crisis? This was COVID for a lot of districts. Some districts came out of that really well. Even though it was a tough time, parents said they did a really good job with a difficult situation. Other districts, they said they really botched that. And I know the pandemic stunk, but they could have done things a lot better. Whatever it may be, if it's something that big or something small in a school, the question is, how will you handle the crisis? And in particular, for this audience, I would say, are you staying in your lane? Do you know which crises are Board of Education crises and which crises, sorry, Dr. Avery, are all your problem and your team? And the board has to say, it's not that we don't care, of course we care, but it's not ours to deal with. Some crises are yours to deal with. Which crises are those?
Number one, budget.
All the stuff that was in that puzzle piece, right? The stuff that's your responsibility. If there's a crisis around that, those are your crises. The budget, the superintendent, policy crises, collective bargaining crisis, whatever it may be. If it's in your lane, then the crisis is yours to deal with in partnership with the superintendent. If it's not your crisis. So God forbid if there's a fire in a school, there's a safety incident, it's Dr. Avery's problem. And you can support him and perhaps give him what he needs behind the scenes, but you're not out the ones in front, you're not the ones out in front talking to the public about that crisis or trying to solve it. Everyone good on that? And I just alluded to this, but I'm going to say it again because it bears repeating in all of these trainings, staying in your lane. It's the hardest thing I think about being a board member, especially because we want to help people with all kinds of things they're worried about. And we see ourselves as ambassadors and advocates for our constituents. But what you didn't see in those puzzle pieces was special ed IEPs, my child's bus pickup spot, what was served for lunch yesterday, that incident in Mrs. Murphy's third grade classroom. Those are not your lane. And the minute that you all getting into other people's lanes, especially the superintendent's lane or vice versa, the public starts to recognize that. And if you're tripping over one another and it's not clear who's on first and whose lane is what, the public picks up on that pretty quickly. And what does that do? What have we been talking about all night? Communication. What else? What effect does that have on their perception of the school district overall?
In charge.
Who's in charge? And do they know? And who's in charge of what? It erodes public confidence. Exactly what we're trying not to do. Okay. This is the slide you've been waiting for. We're a little bit behind schedule, but not too bad. I promise I'll get us out of here at 9:30. So why don't we take a quick, say 8-minute, just stretch bio break. Back in our seats at like 8:22.
I know, you just don't even know, dude.
Is that a request for a 5-minute break?
Yeah, quicker the better.
Are you on the,
Two different schools
Salon?
on that.
oops.
Thank you, folks at home.
plenty of money.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. ECS is viable.
We're back.
Jocelyn looked at me and said,
We're not on, we're live now.
money.
Back in.
But we're back online.
Yeah.
I know Dr. Aver's on a call, but otherwise, great to see you all back. I'm glad no one fled the scene. That's a good sign. Don't mind picking my jacket off. It's a little warm in here, so get a little more casual and comfortable for part two. Thank you for your work so far. It's been great seeing you all so engaged, so thanks. We closed part one with a lot of tips from me about what not to do, some cautionary tales about behaviors that is not conducive to building confidence in the board. So I want to spend some time in the second half talking a lot more about what you can do and what you should do in order to be an effective board with respect to communication. So with that, I want to revisit the agenda. Here we are. We just finished our break. And we're going to talk about improving communication from and about the Board of Education. And here, when I say the Board of Education, I'm often meaning that partnership between the Board of Education and the superintendent, the administration in general. And I'm still aiming for a 9:30 wrap up, so we're going to make up some time here. I want to go back to the quote that I shared earlier, that is sort of my touchstone. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And in our next hour or so, we're going to spend time talking about specific strategies and tactics and ways that you as a board and district leadership can tell your story better, meaning the story of the board itself, and by extension, the story of the Bridgeport Public Schools. Okay. So, as you know, plenty of people are telling your story for you. You named some of them in our brainstorming about all the different groups that are out there. Everyone has an opinion about the schools. Some opinions are more informed than others. Some maybe have an opinion because they have a kid in the schools, or they work in the schools, or a grandkid, or a neighbor, or they're a reporter, they're an elected official, and they all think they know something about the schools. There are headlines out there that are telling stories about your district that maybe wouldn't necessarily be the stories that you want to tell. Doesn't mean these stories are untrue. Sometimes when we leave people to tell a story for us, they tell untruths or misinformation, and other times the things they tell are true, they just may not be the things that we want to lead with. So how do we tell our version of the story? One thing I want to caution you about with respect to some of these big headlines about things that are either about the board or the district that are sort of the big stories of the day, if you will. I know some districts will often say, how do we offset this? We got to tell people about all the good stuff going on. Yes, this is happening. And there are some issues with the budget, and some people have had some layoffs, and the state is involved. But if we just tell enough stories about all those kids who are working hard and the teachers who are being creative and innovative and the successes, that'll be enough to offset this. I just don't agree fundamentally. What I do agree with is telling those stories. We've got to get those out there. We've got to do a much better job of striking a better balance so that people do hear about those other things. But that doesn't mean we can ignore these stories. So we've got to find ways also to tell our version of these stories. Again, not to say none of this is true, or the state doesn't know what it's talking about, or here's the story of the budget, but at least getting your version out there. I think sometimes we have a tendency to say, we just won't even talk about that as much. We'll talk about all the good stuff, and the public will say that's fine. We all know that's not the case, but I get the impulse. Okay. So, communicating about the Board of Education and your work. What are the stories that you want to tell? Think back to the same puzzle pieces I showed you in part one, and the stories that we chose to tell about the Boston School Committee. What are the stories we need to tell about you and your work in order for the public to understand the board's role, what you're working on, where you're going? Where do we start in terms of some ideas for content? Thinking about this. What are some of those stories? Yes.
Oh, we have been out front publicly fighting for more money.
Great. The fiscal story. Yes, the public knows they're going to have to make some cuts, some layoffs, whatever it may be. They need to know that you aren't just sitting by saying, oh, well, that's a hand we were dealt. You are at the State House. You are fighting hard to get as much revenue for your kids as possible. Yes, tell that story. What other stories we need to tell in terms of, yes.
Casimir?
Oh, sorry.
It's quite all right. I wanted to just take a step back for a second, because in order to communicate to people about who you are as a board member, it's important for you to know yourself. self-knowledge, like introspection, to constantly do introspection. Admit that, when you're wrong. Admit when you've been mistaken. I think that especially in this community, people will have a lot more respect for that type of thinking. And I think about how you talk about model the behavior that you want students and staff to emulate, specifically during times of conflict. I think when there's times of conflict, that shows exactly who you are. It shows exactly what you are made of. So that's all I wanted to say.
Some really great points in there. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, especially your first point really picks up picks up on something we talked about in the first half. And that is, it's kind of like that question of where does the buck stop? I think it's a certain amount of comfort in saying, we know we can do better. I personally can do better. We as a district can do better. I think sometimes because we are so used to trying to defend, that we have a hard time admitting that. Again, that same superintendent I was talking about a moment ago about the bus was being delayed was great about this. I've worked for superintendents who, when test scores come out, they would say, 5th grade math looks great. Let's lead with that. We're doing well with high school literacy. Let's lead with that. And yes, the superintendent would do that as well, but she wasn't trying to downplay the other scores either. She would say, those science scores at the middle school level are embarrassing. Let's talk about what we're going to do about that in the press release or at the press conference and tell people this is unacceptable. We can do better. We're better than this. And here's the investment we're going to make in middle school science. And here are our targets, whatever it may be. But I think it gets to your point about sort of being comfortable enough in your own skin to say, we own this, and not just being defensive and constantly litigating and trying to deflect, but sort of, I think, doing what people respect, and that is a certain amount of ownership. And your second point is well taken to remind me what it was.
We talked about modeling the behavior that you want students and staff to emulate, especially during times of conflict. That just shows exactly what type of person you are, what you're made of.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's also just about naming that too. I think sometimes it's like, I'm from an Irish Catholic family, so we specialize in this, but just sometimes pretending it's not happening. It's just so we won't talk about that conflict. We'll never talk about it again. Instead of just saying, we know these are difficult times, and we know people have different viewpoints about a lot of this stuff. And some people may want X, some people may want Y, but we all want what's best for kids. How do we sort of work through that and just name it instead of pretending that it's not out there? So thank you for sharing those points. Great. The other thing I want to pick up from your comments is it also goes back to, I think, humanizing each of you. Yes, you are this Board of Education, but you're also individuals. Like I said about the Boston team, we wanted to go out of our way to say, did you know that Michelle Rayner leads a Head Start in Dorchester? And she's been working with kids ages 0 to 4 her whole career. People need to know that that's what she brings to her conversations at the board level about this work. And the same for the other 6 members. So I think knowing yourself and us feeling comfortable as communicators, telling your stories individually and collectively. Great, thank you. Other content that you think is worth sharing with the public to help them understand your roles, your journey that you're on? Yes, sir.
I would say communication. Why communication? Why communication? If we don't communicate with them, how are they going to communicate with us? One of the things communication is the trust. And I'll never forget when gentlemen here, remember when you say, I believe? I still remember that. So yes, it's not the point you believe in me. Believe yourself, come to me and I talk to you. But we need to have that trust. Because for many years, and everybody knows this, Bridgeport was always a mess. Some people they don't trust. So we had to work very hard because when you don't trust somebody, it's very hard to trust that person back. So we have to show them we're here, communicate. And most important thing, and I always say this, is respect. If you don't respect others, it's not going nowhere. You have to own your respect. So,
absolutely.
So that's one of the big keys to communication.
That's a great point. And I think
believe.
Sometimes, and I'm not referring to Bridgeport at all, but other places I've worked, sometimes we think about, where does the board interact with the public? Oh, that's why we have board meetings. And we're going to talk a little bit later about just how limited that particular vessel is for actual communication? And what are the other ways that you can have the more communication that you're talking about that is truly an interaction between individuals that where you really get to know each other, demonstrate that respect? So thanks for that. Yes.
Yeah, I think an important part of communicating about the work we're doing is you threw up those headlines and they were very big, is countering false narratives with facts, with documentable facts. For example, the governor came out and said he don't want to fund our schools because we wasting the money on too many highly paid administrators. So I went into some data about his town of Greenwich, and we actually had the same amount of central office administrators, and they got 1/3 the population. So that's part of our work. We're doing a lot more with less than the surrounding towns, and those are the kinds of things we've got to accentuate, especially in a town like Connecticut, in a state like Connecticut, where we basically have those things that you had within Boston with the different neighborhoods, but we got different towns. So same thing.
Having your facts is definitely important. What you don't want people to do is be able to say they don't even know what they're talking about. They have their facts wrong, their numbers wrong. One of the things I want to also highlight as content for you all is this work that you're doing. This is not small potatoes. The fact that you have now engaged in 6 lengthy professional development sessions. I'm working right now with the Holyoke Public Schools in Holyoke, Mass. As you may know, they've been in receivership for the past 10 years. The state has basically taken over the district. They stripped of all of its powers for the past 10 years. They're about to get those powers back on July 1. They'll be the first district to come out of receivership in the history of the Commonwealth under this model. What I'm working with them on is how to tell that story of them getting ready to get out of receivership. And the work that they have done, not unlike what you're doing, although they've been doing it for the past 2 years. And part of their narrative is we've undergone more training as a Board of Education than any other school committee in the state. Most people, they go through their charting the course, which is sort of our school committee 101, and then they're done and they're left to their own devices. We've been engaged in hundreds of hours of training. To me, that's a feather in your cap. You may not have liked how it came about, or you may not have wanted to do it. Maybe you don't want to be here tonight, but you should take credit for the fact that you have now, I hope, developed knowledge and skills that are going to make you better board members. Nick.
I was just going to point out that it isn't just these 6. I mean, I've worked with this board 11 times over the last 2 years. And that's just me. And I know I'm not the only person that they work with. So they're very dedicated.
That's awesome. And I think it gets to the point, one of the points that our colleague made online about sort of being honest about the fact that you're growing. We're a learning organization as a school district. And that's not just the kids, that's the adults too, right? So it's okay to say we didn't have all the answers before, we still don't. But guess what? We know that we could bring in some experts who can help us do a better job managing the money, setting policy, communicating with our constituents, whatever those things are. Talk about that journey, and I think people will appreciate that. All right, really quickly, other sort of story ideas based on your roles and responsibilities.
I like the positive too.
What's that?
I like the positive too.
Positive, yeah. Some of the stuff that's going on in the board and the district, especially the stuff that you have the direct control over. To me, this stuff is sort of a checklist, right? If these are the 5 big things, maybe a couple of others that are your responsibility, you might ask yourselves, what kind of story have we told or are we telling in each of these 5 areas? One, to help the public understand that these are our lanes. These are things we're supposed to be working on. How much do they know about the work that you are doing or plan to do in each of those 5 major roles? There's your content. That's what I was saying about the Boston School Committee. We were very intentional in saying, you know what? I don't think the public knows diddly-do about our policies and how we go about debating policy, looking at policies nationally, getting input, doing the research. So we tried to do a better job of telling that story. You could probably do the same for each of the 5. Collective bargaining is a little trickier, but at least trying to tell the story so people know not just what your responsibilities are, but how you're carrying them out. So I won't belabor the point, but it's kind of asking yourself these questions. What if you were to sit down and actually have a brainstorming session, the 10 of you, and say, what are our roles and responsibilities as a BOE? Who are the individuals carrying out these responsibilities? How are you telling the story about the individuals around these tables and the expertise and the experience that you bring to the table? How are you fulfill your obligations in these areas? What are our priorities moving forward? And that's something you're working on, so your goal setting. How are we learning to lead more effectively, as I just described? What have we already accomplished? What progress have we made? Not just as a district, but as a board. And thinking specifically about your horse in this race. Okay. I think one of the most important things, and I know it's a work in progress, is that district vision and mission. And as you evolve with that work and engage the community in setting that vision and being really clear about where this district is headed and the goals that you and Dr. Avery share as a team, really articulating those in as many ways as possible. Just as this school is doing, for example, with its vision of the graduate. That is the direction for this particular school. What kind of graduates are we going to produce? And what are the tools you need to be able to just communicate about that vision once you have set it? And you can say the same about a lot of these other puzzle pieces too. So we've talked about the messages. We've just skimmed the surface of the messages, the content. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the channels, okay? What are all the different tools we have in our toolkit to disseminate those messages out in the community, right? So we have all the stories we want to tell. How, when, and where do we want to tell them? Well, here are just a few. Your website, email communications, social media, just everyday conversations. We don't talk about this as much, but it's important, I believe, in a small town and a big city and everything in between. It's when you run into someone in the supermarket and they say, "What's going on with that Board of Ed?" Is your response, "Oh my God, it is whew." Or is it, "We're doing some really good stuff. Let me tell you what we're up to." Is your sort of produce aisle speech, if you will, a lot of complaints and a lot of gloom and doom? If so, that's not instilling confidence.
No.
Or do you have some stories that you're ready to tell out on the playground, in the produce aisle, wherever you may be on the playing field, that say, "Wow, I didn't know that. That actually makes you feel better about these schools."
But trust us, they stop us in anywhere.
I'm sure they do.
Anywhere.
Part of the job, right?
Any place. I can put party, supermarket. If you got to go to the bathroom, they stop us. I'm telling you, ask them any question.
And I then to sort of keep a tally in your mind when you have those encounters, how often are you telling a positive story, or how often are you reinforcing perhaps some of the negative perceptions of the district?
I'm sorry to interrupt you in that second. And I agree with you, but I'm not agreeing 1 second in that part. Why? Because some people, they would like to give the information. When they know they're supposed to give the positive way, they try to give the negative way so the board look bad. And trust me, I have that experience. And when that person comes to me and tell me, "Oh, I heard this day," I said, "That's not true."
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. In my answer for them, you can ask me, he's here. Call Dr. Avery, superintendent's office. They will give you the correct answer. Do not believe what people say in the street, because sometimes people dare not tell the truth.
Yeah, your point's well taken. And I know you can't change other people's behavior. My point is we can change our own behavior. So perhaps you're going to have that conversation with someone and they're going to complain about something. They may have their mind made up about it. Maybe you have an alternative perspective to share on it, maybe not. What I'm saying is maybe before you walk away from that, you say, "Oh, thanks for telling me that. Did you know that X, Y, and Z?" Or something else that at least creates something to offset that. They may not care. They may say, "Oh, what does he know?" But at least you tried. What troubles me is when board members, faculty, principals are actually part of the problem and are just fueling a public sense of lack of confidence because the stories they're telling out in the community just contribute to the despair and not to the hope. Jennifer.
It's Casimir.
Oh, thank you.
It's fine. I'll
Great job moderating.
Gotcha.
Ms. Casimir.
Let me take my hand down. So a perfect example of what you're talking about is like the other night I had done a presentation at the Republican Town Committee. And the last meeting that I had with them was in March. So when I went in March, I was just blindly writing down things that I felt like was important for them to know about the Board of Education and what was going on. And so I was really pleasantly surprised that I was only given 10 minutes, a 10-minute window of time. But by the time people started like asking me a whole bunch of questions that I was definitely able to answer, 40 minutes had went by. And I was only allotted 10 minutes, but they just kept letting it go, the meeting go. So this past Thursday, I had given them an update on from the time in March when I was there up until that night. And we talked about finances, we talked about goals, and these were things that I pulled from all of the information from, you know, on our portal and, you know, from our CFO. I had just pulled together like really simple things to say, okay, this is what's going on. This is what was voted on. This was what was shot down. And, you know, they had told me that I was the only like person that they have ever endorsed or the person that they ever supported that was a Republican that has ever came to their town committee and actually shared information with them, updates on the Board of Ed, and they were really concerned and they were engaged. And so I felt really confident, you know, about the information that I was giving them. Because again, I wasn't making up this information. The information came from the CFO. I compared the commissioner's goals versus Dr. Avery's goals that he had for us versus what the board itself, the goals and the vision, you know, that we're working on. So I was really happy to be able to disseminate like all of this information that came from us collectively as a board, you know, that we voted on that we thought was important. And so I
That's
was
awesome.
really happy to hear that they said that I was the only person, like in the history of the Republican Town Committee, that actually came there and shared that information with them. So I thought it
That's
was a
great.
good marriage into what it is that you were just talking about.
It's perfect. And thank you for sharing that example. And I think, you know, rather than each person having to do that individually, as you did, which is great, I like your sort of suggestion, maybe not suggestion, too strong a word, but implication that wouldn't it be great if you all had a similar sheet of points to use in the community? Just the facts, not necessarily your opinions about things, but like thinking about all the areas you're responsible for. What is the one thing you would say in a conversation with the Republican Town Committee or the Safe Neighborhoods Group or whoever you're in front of about policy, about your budget situation, about the district vision? Or are there 10 different versions of that floating around? Because I want you all on the same page in the way that you're describing. I also want to be clear that I'm not talking about being a Pollyanna here. I'm not saying that you need to walk around saying it's all wine and roses and everything's great in Bridgeport Public Schools and I don't know what you're talking about. It's all fine. It's fine. No, absolutely not. Of course, there are things you're going to work on, but there are ways of describing those things that can express some optimism and some hope. I sort of alluded to this earlier, but I'm going to go back to the Boston example yet again and tell you that our message back in the late 90s was not, our schools are awesome. We have 125 outstanding schools. That would have been fiction. Our message was, our schools are a heck of a lot better than you think. And it's not just Boston Latin School and Boston Arts Academy and 123 crappy schools.
Mhm.
The fact of the matter is, we have lots of schools at lots of different points on the continuum in terms of the quality, the condition of the facilities, but we want you to come and take a closer look. Don't base your judgment about this district based on what you read in the papers, what you heard from your neighbor, or someone who went to the school in 1978. Come and find out. That was our message. And that's fact. That's not us saying everything's perfect. It's saying we think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
College.
That's not Pollyanna. That is inviting people to take an action that may surprise them. Really briefly, Joe, we're gonna move on.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
These communication channels are kind of passive. A lot of us have been out there knocking on doors,
Love it.
communicating our policies, our procedures, what should be going right. And when we were talking, there was a time in the district, some people were saying our kids are failures, our kids are failing, our kids
They're
are
not.
failing. And we were constantly pushing the narrative that our kids are more than test scores, our kids are resilient, our kids are awesome.
Here's what
And even though we have this financial difficulty, we can advocate, we can come together, we could overturn this because we, the people, we have the power. And as we get to doors, as we get on our social media pages, which some people don't like some of my social media posts, but they're always backed up with facts, always backed up with documents saying this and reiterating this over and over and over again for the community.
And that's exactly great point. And that's exactly why I always include this icon. I think when we think about communications in this day and age, we're so quick to think about all the technology tools. And to me, they're never going to replace the power of those face-to-face, in-person conversations. And your examples are case in point. Move us along. A few more channels. There's the media. We're not going to spend much time talking about this today. But the media is certainly a channel that you can think about how to leverage best. Yes, they're going to cover some of the negative stuff, but how are you leveraging the media perhaps to tell different stories, including not just stories that are covered, but submitting guest op-eds, getting people to write letters to the editor, and some of the other ways that we can get content into newspapers and other media outlets that's not relying on reporters covering those stories. And then, of course, we talked earlier about school board meetings themselves and how those are in and of themselves communication channels. And I want you to walk into every one of those meetings with that in mind, not just what are we discussing and debating and voting on tonight, but what impression are we giving the community if they tune in or are here in the room with us? Are they going to walk away feeling better about us and the Bridgeport Public Schools, or think, whoa, what was that? All right, so I'm going to dive a little deeper into just a couple of these. One is your website, and I know that you've got an overhaul coming up, right? A couple of you mentioned that there's some revamping being done, which is great. In my research to try to learn about you all, I went to your website and didn't learn a whole heck of a lot. You've got your photos, you've got your contact information, which is great. I don't think people care about how you all voted for your officers over the years. And I say that not to get picky here, but again, to think about what's the story we're trying to tell. Is that an important part of your story about how people voted on the officerships? I would argue not.
Yeah.
So what are the things that we want people to know? I wanted to learn about who you all are, your individual backgrounds, who's a parent, what do you do for a living? I didn't get any of that, so something like that may be in the works.
We do that. We talk about that. And people ask a lot of questions, trust me, yes.
Yeah, and you have the right to know who they're.
Not on the web.
So based on what you
Oh, and that's the website, of course,
based on what you heard me say earlier, what we discussed earlier about some of the content we want to share, what would be your wish list? What would it look like for us to revamp those pages, specifically about the Board of Ed, not the whole district? What should people know about you and your work that could be added to your website as part of this redesign? This all may be happening, so I'm not making any assumptions.
Well, like you said, our bio.
Your bios. What else?
Goals,
Your
the board
goals.
goals we just finalized.
And putting those on the board page so that you know that's part of the board's responsibility. Is that goal set?
Like we care. We know, like something they know we care. We here for you, and especially for the kid.
Absolutely.
So because they
It's if you have,
they elect us, they vote for us, they trust us, so we're gonna let them know. Like I do. I tell them I work for you because you elect me, so they trust me. I want to be sure they okay. I'm gonna take care of his kid.
great. What other content would you want to see on these pages so people understand the board and it's in your job better?
Meetings, when are we meeting? You know, and kind of our committee schedule, and I know that's there, but you have to dig for it.
You do. And I struggle with this with every district I work with, to be blunt. I go to those meeting pages hoping I will learn the kinds of things that are rising to the top, what's being debated, and what I see are agendas that are just lists of things that don't really tell me a whole lot. Yes. Someone has a comment?
It's Casimir.
Really briefly,
Yeah.
please, or by one time.
Yeah, I'll make it brief.
Okay.
To your point that you're making, I think that it would be a good idea for us to put up why we joined the board. The question that you asked us in the beginning of this, to circle back to that. I think that would be important too. Why are we here?
Great. Love that little interview or Q&A with each board member that answers some of those questions.
I agree.
Some other thoughts I had, just look at your page. There's not much here about educating the public about what the board's role is. Here we are educating all of you and make sure everyone's on the same page. But what I rarely see on Board of Education pages is the Board of Education in Bridgeport, in Milton, Mass, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, are these 5 things. The public needs to know that. And the homepage of your Board of Education pages is a great place to put that. Member bios, district mission vision, you talked about all that. Also, you mentioned the goals, but also your accomplishments. People need to know over the past school year, what the heck have you guys done? We've passed these policies. We have emerged from a difficult budget process in this way. We have been through lots of training, whatever that list is, keep that front and center too. So people can't say, I had no idea what they do. Same points that we were talking about from the list that your colleague shared about things you would say out in the community might be things that you also feature on your website. Okay. Everyone's favorite topic, our next channel that we're going to go down a rabbit hole. Social media. It came up a little bit in your small group discussions about people's perceptions, and some of you rightly pointed out they can be detrimental if it's what other people post on social. That may be just inflammatory or pure fiction or downright nasty. Or social media can be a powerful tool for the district, knowing that you have a presence that both John and Nick, it sounds like, manage in terms of telling stories about the district that may not otherwise be told. They're not going to get covered in the newspapers, for example. So they can be both sort of pros and cons of social media, certainly. I always encourage districts to have a social media presence, but again, to use that tool, not just to tell the district story, but to tell the board story too. Especially in your case, where you are making headlines and you feel like the state is coming after not just the district, but also the board. What is that counter narrative that you can tell about the training you participated in, about your goals, about all this good work, using all the channels at your disposal to tell both of those stories in concert with one another? Okay. I also have to use this moment to talk about social media and board behavior, because several groups talked about, where are we? Board behavior being a huge part of how people perceive certainly the board and the district as a whole. So some of the advice I always give folks is, one, anyone in the district itself, individual board members, the superintendent, don't engage on social media in the comments section. I know it's tempting, but there are always people who want to do it. And they say, well, just that Sally said this about the high school and it's just not true. I couldn't let it go unchallenged. I had to jump into the comments and set the record straight. Goodbye, good luck. You'll never come back. Because the minute you have one comment to make, you are down the rabbit hole, right? And then everyone expects you, oh, okay, she engages on social media. Everyone expects you to answer questions, to get involved in debates. I strongly discourage you from doing so because it's a losing proposition. Certainly the behavior we talked about in terms of Board of Education meetings and how you interact with one another, with the superintendent, with your colleagues, and with the public, you want that to be of the highest professional level too, and to be completely civil and appropriate and free of any nastiness that makes someone have less confidence in you as a board member and in the board as a whole. Okay? I know how it feels, and especially if you feel attacked by a constituent, it is just human nature to want to say, I got to defend myself. It's a fool's errand. It really is. And I know how hard it is for elected officials and non-elected officials alike. So you can certainly have a school committee, social media presence. I know, especially as people who are running for office, you may have an account that, your re-election account. Push out all the stories you want, but don't engage in the comments. I just think there's no advantage to doing so. You're not going to change anyone's mind on there. They're probably not going to change your mind. Just stay out of it. I will say some districts, in order to get around that or to deal with that problem, are just turning off comments altogether. That's an option on Facebook where you just disable comments. I always discourage that strategy too. I think the optics on that are terrible. I think it says, we don't want to hear from you. We just want to use this like a website and push out information, but please don't tell us what you think about this thing. To me, social media is just that. And by disabling comments, you are taking the social out of social media, as painful as it is. We were pleasantly surprised in Boston because when Facebook sort of first hit the scene, I was one of the people saying, we need an account. We need to get on social media. And my bosses all said, are you insane? Why would you want to give the public one more place to beat us up? And I said, guess what? You're already getting beat up on. The question is, do you want to just sit on the sidelines and get beat up? Or do you want us to have an account where we can start telling some stories, not go engage in that space and go toe to toe with your critics, but tell some of these other stories that we want to get out there that the Globe and the Herald and 4, 5, and 7 are not covering. And we did. And at times it is challenging, there's no question, but I truly believe that the pros outweigh the cons. And we've been particularly encouraged that even though we don't engage online, there are others who will jump in, especially parents, who will challenge one another and say, that comment you made out at the high school, it's simply not true. My kid's in 10th grade and she loves her classes and she's thriving in the violin or whatever it may be. Let them engage in all that and you can sit that out. I know it's hard, believe me. And it's tempting to just say, we got to get in there, but it's a losing proposition. I'm going to move on because social media, if I open the floor, will never rebound, I know. I do want to share that I already said to both John and Tim.
Tim, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Quickly, he was here earlier. that I think you guys are doing a great job on social with the stories about the district. And I've been following you now on Facebook and Instagram, and you're telling these great stories. I love this, great photos from the math meet. And here's your first year principal. These are great stories. Let's do the same thing with stories about the board. Even those profiles we were just talking about, you could profile board member, whatever it makes sense for you all. But how do we tell those stories too? Because what we can't do is assume, as I said earlier, that people are going to see this great stuff and say, the board must be doing a great job. How else could we have a successful math meet or have the first year principal? The board must be crushing it. No, people do not make that connection, nor should they, because there may or may not be a direct correlation. So we have to feed them that information about what are the stories that tell us about the board itself and not just the great work that's happening. Same with the newsletter. I think someone mentioned earlier, love this newsletter. How much is it used to tell stories about you all and the work that you're doing? And how do we think about integrating both of that content? Okay. So we could talk about each one of these things for a lot longer than I just did, but I sort of just want to give you a flavor of how you think about these channels and how do you leverage each of them and so many others with all that content that we started to brainstorm. I want to pause here and reiterate something that I tried to say a couple of times, but want to make sure it's really clear so that there's no misunderstanding. Thus, the movie marquee. Improving the work of the Board of Education and improving communication from the board are both critical. I think sometimes someone could hear a presentation like this one or hear about a presentation like this one and say, oh, so the board got training in public relations and how to look better and how to sort of get better headlines. Some of those things are what I've talked about, but to me, that is not the work. The work is twofold. It is one, getting better at the work that we do, and also telling the story of those improvement efforts. So let there be no mistake, this is not just about spin or anything else that people will try to dismiss in terms of talking about communications work. It's actually the work itself, and they go hand in hand. Okay. Finally, I want to just spend a few minutes talking, as I mentioned earlier, about two-way communication and recognizing that I think sometimes when we think about communication, we think about all the channels that we have at our disposal to tell our story and push out news and information and highlights and good stuff. But what we haven't talked as much about is what Albert was mentioning earlier, that's about that sort of conversation and the two-way communication. How do we, particularly as a Board of Education, truly create authentic opportunities to hear from our constituents? How do we create opportunities to hear from teachers, parents, students, partners, their ideas, their questions, their concerns, whatever that may be, other than that painfully limited Board of Education meeting, right? Where people may or may not have the personality type to want to get up and testify for 3 minutes on a given night or whatever the parameters are here. Two. That might not be everyone's style. If that is the only way that you're hearing from people, that's obviously very limited. And the produce aisle being the other. So what are the other ways that we can create opportunities to hear from our constituents and truly engage in ways that are not just sort of formal and stiff? One of the things that we tried in Boston that really I love talking about because it was really very successful. One of our members had come from sort of a community organizing background. And she was incredibly frustrated with the structure of meetings, I think, as many members are, because they are so rigid. It's a business meeting. So you're there to deal with new business and to vote on things and approve all kinds of, grants and field trips, whatever else you're doing. And there's this little portion of the program for public comment in most places. That, as we just said, is not give and take. It is not dialogue. It is truly just the public saying a few words. And she said, I know we need to have that. Of course we need to have that. But what can we supplement that with in order to have more authentic conversation with our constituents? And she promoted or conceived of this entire sort of format of community forums that she pitched to the chair and her colleagues and said, I will organize these. I want to have a series over the course of the school year. I think it was maybe like 6 a year, like one every other month or something like that. And she wanted to have them scattered around the city. It wasn't just everyone come to our board chamber. So she had them in different neighborhoods. And they were often co-hosted by a local group. There was a neighborhood group or a partner group. And it was about a particular topic. So one month might have been STEM education. Another month may have been English learners or arts education. It wasn't something that was sort of on the table at the moment for a big decision. It wasn't a policy debate or something that was sort of up for a big moment, but just something that people cared about. And what she wanted to do was structure them in such a way that it wasn't this us them thing, but rather truly engaging in conversation. And one of her, I think, most significant ideas had to do with even just the way the room is set up. So I don't know about here, but this is how it looks in most places, including Boston. These blue dots are all of you. You're at the front of the room, sometimes quite literally elevated off the floor, right? Is that how it works here? Or are you?
Different locations.
Yeah.
There's this usually table or microphone stand where someone can come and make comments. And then there's the audience. These other dots are all teachers and parents and whoever from the community wants to come to a meeting. What does this evoke for you? What does this layout sort of create in terms of dynamics?
Us versus them.
Us and them,
Separation.
Intimidating.
separation.
Don't cross this.
Intimidating.
What's intimidating about this?
It's almost like, yeah, it's like us versus them. So it's almost like you're going up as a parent almost to be judged by a bunch of board members.
A colleague was describing her board chamber to me the other day. She says this ornate old building in New England looks like a castle where they have the and the board is elevated. And she said just that. She's like, it's intimidating. You feel like you're like on Game of Thrones and you're going to, meet the court. And that's especially if you're not comfortable in those environments, it can be very intimidating. Don't you have another?
Yeah, just don't cross this line.
Yeah, don't cross this.
Cross this line.
It looks almost like militaristic. Yeah.
As I told you before, because so many years back, it was not trust.
Yeah.
And they keep doing the same thing. Us, the new board members, we try to break that. It's not that we now go over nobody either from that table in our policy. We're trying to let them know the parent and staff and we're here to listen to you.
Yes.
We're trying little by little.
That thought, we're going to get there. So I'm not suggesting that this needs to be blown up in terms of the board meetings themselves. Board meetings have a certain purpose and function. They are business meetings, right? So some of this makes sense. You all are there at a table trying to get your business done. And the public is invited to observe, participate. Susan, this member I'm talking about, wasn't saying, let's throw that out altogether. She was saying, what can we do on top of that to have more meaningful conversations? So in her forums, she said, we're going to have them out in the community, as I said, in not just our spaces, not even just schools. We're going to have them in libraries, community centers, a church basement, whoever will have us, where people feel comfortable to come. So it's less intimidating and not just that government building. I want round tables. And look where these blue dots are now, all of you. You're scattered around. And every table has 8 to 10 people. And it's a mixture of board members, teachers, principals, parents, students, community members, whoever shows up. And guess what? The blue dots aren't the facilitators at that table. You aren't there as the powers that be imparting wisdom on the folks. I think that's the other dynamic here. There's a sense of like, oh, we're coming to you and you have information to impart upon us. This was very much about, I am at the table just like any one of you. There were facilitators, and for every session, Susan would find people in the community to be facilitators and have a short training for them. And they would serve at the table with guiding questions and appoint a note taker based on the topic of that evening. And the board member's job or the superintendent's job or the assistant superintendent or whomever else was there was simply to participate and ideally to do more listening than talking. She made that very clear. I think it was a really good suggestion. You were not there to be the voice of expertise in the room. You're there to listen to people. And I can't even understate the impact of that had on the dynamic in the room. That even the people, who these people are come to every meeting and have to get up and yell and scream, even they sort of didn't have their moment at the podium that was sort of grandstanding because they were just part of the conversation. And the facilitators were skilled in sort of making sure everyone's voice was heard and no one could just sort of get drowned out or dominate the conversation. Other lessons from this, you know, Susan made a really good effort to aggregate what was heard. So from every table coming back and sort of getting a sense of the themes that emerged and sharing them out more widely. The website, email, other ways of saying, even if you couldn't come, we want you to hear what your peers said about this topic. So there are lots of variations on this, and I've seen other forms of this in lots of communities, but I encourage you to think about whether something like that would work here. Do you guys do like anything like this now? No.
Well, Dr. Avery's.
Dr. Avery has
committee
forums.
Okay.
They actually,
Set
I
up
missed
like
that.
that. But I think the other part,
Like a town hall?
yeah, the other part is that that's one of the recommendations from the commissioner that that this board has to do some community forums on the goals and things, you know, so I think it's an opportunity to have a deeper conversation about, but my ask of you is there, you know, some type of format or a small training that we can provide this team to be able to kind of move towards something like this? You know, I don't know.
Absolutely.
And
So are you all about to engage in a strategic planning process? Or that's ongoing now?
No, we're probably going to, but within the next year or so,
Okay.
sure.
I think that's often where this happens well.
Yeah.
When districts engage in strategic planning, they kind of blow up this and say we need a different format. And they've got lots of different meetings that are sort of structured differently and get input. And there are organizations that facilitate that really well. And I can connect a couple. You guys probably know some too.
I believe that we have in our bylaws the requirement to do this that we've never done. It's one of those things that we have not done. So it is written into our bylaws that we're supposed to be doing 1 or 2 a year, and don't do.
Another opportunity there.
Right.
And I think we're all pretty well versed of talking to our constituencies, and if we're not by this point, we're actually in the wrong place. I could sit at the table with, I think,
Listening to.
That's
talking to
That's-
and talking and listening.
Uh,
Wait, you are correct. Thank you for the correction. Yeah, we do it naturally. A lot of us do. We went to, some of us went to a barbecue the other day. The constituents there, they were talking to us. We go into fairs, festivals, carnivals, parades, and the communities, they're engaging with us and we're having those conversations. The only thing that's different about this is a little round table.
And I was gonna say, it's the listening piece. Something that's Dr. Avery has been doing this past year is the community forums, but at every community forum, the board is getting up there and speaking.
Yeah.
Board members, and we want to hear the public. We hear about the board. We know what the board what wants and stuff like that, but it's been a situation where almost every community forum, somebody from the board is getting up there to say something, and it's like, we're here for the people, like to hear the constituents. Like, we hear each other all the time. And they hear us all the time, so let's hear them. And I think that's what we need to focus on when we do something like this. And you just said it, you know, and inviting the community partners that we have who are kind of doing this work in the ground, on the ground already. We can kind of collaborate with them and different organizations around there. Use a church, use a community hall, and do this work. When I saw you present this the last time, that like, I was like, this is, I think I told you or somebody, was like, I told somebody on the board, like, we need to do something like this, and other things happened, so we
But,
haven't done it, so, yeah.
Caps could mention November, December. I spoke on Saturday morning about the art of listening, and the whole session was about this sort of two-way communication. Just want to pick up on one thing you said, Jennifer, and I think it's a great point. Even that piece about like sharing some information at this forum. So on some of these topics, Susan and the team said, we want to have some just information at the beginning of the forum to set the stage so that everyone at least knows a little bit about what's happening in arts education or STEM education or college readiness or English learners for this district. Not a half-hour presentation, but even just like 10 minutes so that people get sort of an overview of the topic. But guess what? Those presentations weren't made by the board or the superintendent or the district's director of ELs or STEM. They were all community person led. So like, just like you said, a partner organization that knows what you're doing in STEM and perhaps is involved in your work and whatever that topic was, let them get up and make that presentation, perhaps developed in concert with your staff or whomever is the right folks. But we're so used to being the people doing the talking, how nice to relinquish that role a little bit and let people see you do some listening.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with the listening part, but I just want to point out we could be talking about two different things too, because these are the superintendent's forums where we have not had a Board of Education forum. We are supposed to be out in the community developing the goals on what's it?
Summer.
Gray City Schools pointed out that the board got to get out to the community. The
Yes.
board got to do this and that, where the superintendent, no disrespect to the superintendent, is not leading those forums. But us, because we speak for the constituents and we know the community and what our people want and what they need more better to listen to them.
And while
I'm gonna use that word listening a little more.
yeah,
I don't, when I say talk, it's always a two-way conversation in my head, but I do listening as well.
so I didn't have that as one of the puzzle pieces in terms of your roles and responsibilities, but that certainly is one of them, is to sort of be the sort of liaisons, if you will, for the community. Create those opportunities for the community's voice to be heard. So to me, it's not about whether the board's hosting it or Dr. Avery is hosting it. To me, the part of the power of the message is you hosting it together, but in co-hosting it with somebody else. But more importantly, you're there not to host at all, but rather to be a guest at that thing. And you're, again, just sort of one of the people doing a lot more listening than talking. So I'm gonna try to model that and just leave it right now. Someone else have a comment on this? No. So food for thought, and I'm happy to follow up with any of you if you want a little bit more guidance on this. One other sort of strategy that a couple of you have alluded to that I think is really powerful is just literally getting out in the community. But not just sort of on a sort of ad hoc basis where, oh, Jennifer just happens to be going to the road race on Saturday and she's going to talk to people about what's going on. And Maritza's going to this PTA meeting over at this school and she talked about it and it's somewhat haphazard, but being a little bit more organized about it. So this district I worked with in Rhode Island was getting ready to get a bond, trying to get a bond passed for a brand new high school. Huge, huge investment that they needed to get voter support for. So I worked with them over the summer on a number of communication strategies. And one of them was just getting them out in the community to talk to people about this particular project that was proposed. So we equipped them with what we came to call a roadshow. It all fit into a duffel bag, but it's just literally this tablecloth, a retractable banner that disappears into a bag. You guys have seen those, some apparel. They already had the tent. We got some good, collateral material, print material about the proposed project. And we built a schedule for them for the whole summer. And this is a town that is busy in the summer. So there's lots of parades and block parties and festivals and things out in the community. This wasn't come to us, come to our town hall and learn about the building project. This was them setting up shop wherever they could. And at first there was a little bit of eye rolling, like, oh, I gotta give up part of my weekend to go do this. Like I've been working hard all week. I gotta tell you, they had a ball. Like some of these are staff members, some are board members. And by the end of the summer, they were tripping over each other because they had too many people going to these things. You're thinking I'm like making this up, but it was crazy. Yes, some of the conversations were about the building project, and they quickly found out that there was great support for that. People didn't have a lot of questions. They're like, oh yeah, I'm definitely voting yes for that. But they had questions about other things. So they seen this great opportunity for interaction that wasn't a board meeting. It wasn't even as formal as a community forum. It was just a presence in the community. But again, we were deliberate about it. We said, all right, here's the schedule. I had a spreadsheet going. And which three people are going to this one? You have the kit, like really being intentional about it rather than just sort of hoping that someone's going to cover all these things. And there may be events going on that you don't even know about in certain parts of the city or certain communities that maybe none of you have ties in, different ethnic or linguistic minorities where you can find ways to bring people along who can be helpful with that community. But again, being very intentional and thoughtful about it. And if you don't already investing in this kit, that's not a lot of money, but creates a very, I think, solid look for you that reinforces your brand. But most importantly, the brand of the Board of Education being willing to be out in the community, especially partnering with staff, showing that partnership. Dr. Avery's not going to go to every one of those things, but maybe your deputy superintendents will, or your principals, or whomever the right people are to show that partnership. Questions about that?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's something that board does on their own, like they go to that they're at other events. Everybody in the board is at an event every other day. The superintendent's office has events, but I don't think we're always like, I think in the beginning you mentioned like a community calendar or something. So something like that would be helpful, I think, for us. That way, like you said, a few of us can sign up to be with the staff at a community resource fair or at one of the parades. Because we're already there, but if we're all together on, at the table, talking about the
Yeah.
positives, I think that's a great idea.
Summer food sites, most districts have those, like that's a great place to be. Yes,
Sometimes we're together, sometimes we separate.
Yeah.
But every time, we separate, someone is over here, someone's over there, we call each other, listen, we're here. They let you know, we got a calendar, then I invite them. So we always communicate each other and wherever we go, we trying to see, we help the parents.
yes.
We listen, listen to parent, any questions or anything, we let them, if we don't have the answer, we let you, right away, we let you know tomorrow. We don't ignore them.
Yes.
We let them know the next day or something else that day, we call the parent. That's a good thing I have to say, and I'm a witness. Anything and any parent want to know, I'll give it to that day. Every one of us, he called it. And that's a good thing. In that big event, like right now, we haven't won a big one. We did it last year, but this one's going to be much better because the book backpack.
Yep.
I know the city's going to work with us on the board, and and that's the people want to see working as the team.
Yes, all those back to school events, open
Yes.
houses, anything like that.
Yes.
And you raised a good point of like making sure there's follow through. So if there are people who come to that table and say, I do have an issue with this particular thing about my kid or my school,
Mhm.
you've got to be clear that as board, you're not going to solve that, but somebody at that table has to have a form or something to say.
Yes, we have it.
This will go to Dr. Avery on Monday.
Yeah.
Someone will call you back if they don't, look
Trust
whatever it is.
He'd right away call the parent next day.
Otherwise, there's really no trust. Great points. Okay, so we're in the home stretch here. We're gonna do some quick wrap up and reflection. I want to ask you two questions. First question is, what did you learn tonight that can strengthen your effectiveness on the Board of Education? And my second question is, what action steps do you plan to take to follow up on what you learned?
I can answer the first one, that we had to work a little much better to communicate more with the parents, but we had to educate us first before we answer, and we go out to talk with the people to be sure we give it the correct answer. Because we do, one of us say something or do something wrong, they're gonna say the Board of Education. And trust me, they know when they say Board of Education, that means my name is there, and I don't like that.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
Always before I give an answer, I like to search and find out first. So the parents, whoever, community organization, they know what kind of answer. If I don't give the answer, I don't know. I tell them where exactly what to go.
Love it. Thank you. Somebody else answer the first question, Maureen. What else did you learn tonight that you can strengthen your effectiveness, either individually or as a board as a whole? What are some of your other takeaways in terms of learning?
Why you ask me? Well, for me, I mean, yeah, I can name 100 things or anything, but I wanted to focus on something we have more things in common than we realize as a board, and we get it sometimes in our own way, and I'm seeing that, and for me personally, I like to be held accountable, and I don't mind being held accountable, but I need to speak it out. I need to communicate more about it. But then I need to learn how to make those boundaries, because I'm sorry, I'm here for one reason, and that's to make sure that every single child in our district reaches their God-given potential. And that's where my heart lies, because when you talk about what keeps me up at night, I raised 3 daughters in this district, and the schools look the same as when my daughter was first in pre-K and then the daycares. Okay, and they've been advocating. So when I talked about why I became a board member, that's why my answer was as such, because they put me in this seat more because of the work that I did in the community as an advocate for my kids in the PTSO, in the PAC, and all those organizations,
Yeah.
and I put my name in the hat 5 years after, and and I'm here for them and for their children.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to go back to the very first thing you said, and that is that we all have more in common than we have difference, or something to that effect. And my first thought when you said that was, I'm willing to bet that you all share that aspiration that you just articulated. You all want every child in this school district to reach their full potential. Correct. Is there anyone who doesn't feel that way around this table? I think you wouldn't be here if that were the case.
Just making sure.
So we have very strong disagreements about what it's going to take to realize that vision. And you may have different ideas about the means. But Mr. Medina, my point is, I think that if you all can keep your focus on that, the fact that you all share that North Star, that's the goal we all share, and everything else we got to work out in order to make that happen. And the more we focus on the disagreements and what we don't see eye to eye on, the less likely we are to achieve that North Star. So thanks for sharing that. Yes, another learning.
So if this kind of relates, I do some professional developments, or I've done some this month, and it had to do with crisis communication. A lot of things you were talking about today resonated with me from I did earlier this month, and you know, as board chair, I know I wait for the reporters to come to me, so they'll ask me, and then I'll respond, and I'll give the the safe answers, as I think Joe will, do the others, but but I give
I'll let him speak.
that, but I don't go and seek out and tell them, oh, here's the soundbite or whatever, or the headline
Story you want.
I wait for them to come to me. So like, I think that more proactive going out there, as chair, like the stuff we're doing, like, I can shoot a text to chair and say, hey, listen, we've got some good things going on and stuff like that. So that's something, I guess that's also an action step for me, is like kind of be more proactive in that sense as the chair.
That's great. And just to clarify one thing, I'm not sure if this is what you were saying, Jennifer, but when I said, don't sit on bad news, I should have said, tell your parents and your staff first, right? You may have to then either tell the press or react to the press's reaction to that news, but I never want your parents or your staff to find out bad news from the press.
Yeah.
So that may not be what you were saying, but I realized I didn't clarify that when I say you've got to be the one to break bad news, it's not starting with newspaper or that even news, it's with your parents and then deal with the fallout. But thank you for that learning. Other things you learned tonight or want to work on? Yes.
I'll piggyback off of board chair's perspective. I think for me, understanding and I mean, you open my eyes to a number of different the way to look at the communication piece in their entire district, and then bringing the board into mix of that and telling that story, because we don't do enough of that. We have a lot of positive things that we're trying to stay in front of the noise in the community over the last 8 months. So I think we have two guys that does it. And so I was really trying to do in my 6 months goal was just really communicate, whatever we need to do, get out there, communicate, community forums, whatever we have to do, we were just pounding it. Now I can step back a little bit and say, okay, did that work or not? I think it worked, but now we have to kind of enhance it a little bit more by adding the story of the board. The board has worked hard, I feel, and it's been a big difference, so how do we bring that to the forefront a little bit? So some of the ideas that I've heard tonight was I'm able to kind of massage that and give them things to chew on and do, in the middle of all of this, So I think it'll be receptive to them, and they're like, okay, he's trying to communicate. And again, I've tried to build my individual relationships with all of them to the best of my ability. I haven't gotten to all board members in a way to where it should be with all 9, but I can say I have 95% of the board having that one-to-one conversation with me, just having a conversation, right? More so than not. So bringing all those pieces together, we've had some really good experiences with the community engagement. The board has been there with me as well, but what could we do different? The strengths are there, and now we have to materialize with those strengths. And so I think we're primed to do really good things if we stay focused enough. We're looking at doing the goals. We're looking at making sure that we keep student achievement at the forefront of what we do. Let's talk about it. Why are we low in math? Why are we low in reading? What are we going to do differently in the work that we do? Because we're lean, but we have to be mean about the work that we're doing, right? And so when we do that, I think the community is going to buy into that because they know we don't have the funds. They know we hadn't had funds over the last 20 years. But what do we do with that? We're not gonna just stand behind, we don't have funds. We're gonna do what we can do with the little that we have, and we're gonna maximize it, right? And when we do that, what can someone say? They're trying their best, they're doing it, they're working for kids, they're putting they're putting the positive things out there. And it's gonna be a win-win thing, right? And so that's all we have right now is us, right? And the kids have us. So let's maximize that, right?
I love that. Those are some awesome points, Dr. Avery, and I want to just pick up on a couple of them. One, what strikes me about what you just described is sort of this intentionality in communications that I, as you could probably tell, I'm passionate about. The board is one piece of that, but I would say in all of your communications, thinking about not just what stories sort of come our way that we want to tell, that happens to be what's going on this week, or something cool that we want to amplify, but also like, where are the gaps in the narrative out in the community? The board being one of them, and what can we do to fill that gap? And there may be parts of your purview that fall into that too, that have nothing to do with the board. Same for, you're describing, you guys are doing the work. You're just out there like trying to get at it every step of the way, saying, all right, not just are we doing the work, but are we communicating about this at the same time? Are we telling people we're doing this work? Or is a tree fall in the woods? There's all this great stuff going on. People don't even know that you're working on it, and you don't want to wait till the end of the game to say, here's the progress we're making. So thank you for sharing all of that. Yes.
Very fast. It's like we in the tree. You
What's
put the tree.
Yes.
Tree. The dirt, the root. You know, if that's not strong,
Yes.
the tree is not gonna be strong.
Amen.
People think it's gonna be the branch. No, it's the dirt. It has to be, good, and the root and everything. And I can say, us, the board member, we have something different. We got data, we got financial, we got religion, I got family, got union, and us together at the same time. We union, the people they don't understand, and that's why we communicate very good with Dr. Avery. We have something different. We got passion with something different, and that's why we all work, together at the same time. But at the same time, I have to say thank you to Kate. You guys, do an amazing job with us, and I really appreciate that. Everything,
Thank you.
every time you come here is help us to push us what we can do for Bridgeport Public School. I would love that. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Well said. Yes.
Yeah, me, I'm gonna, oh.
Right,
well,
you and me. No.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I did use the word, I did say I used the word talking, and you pointed out the listening, and I think we take a step back and think maybe I do have an implicit bias there, and I'm gonna be sure I take personal inventory in my conversations with the community.
Love it. Thank you. You want to?
What I wanted to add is, and I'll speak for myself and then speak for with my colleagues. I mean, through this, and your question is, what did I learn tonight that can strengthen our effectiveness as a board? For me, I'm going to say this, add to this is I learned some of my weaknesses and some of our weaknesses. Because to be able to get stronger, you got to know where you're weak at. That way you can act on that and strengthen that. And I think that reverse, if you would, psychology will be that. I learned some of my weaknesses and some of our weaknesses, and now we can, build on that and collaborate to build on that.
I love that. And that goes, I think, back to the point that our colleague made online about being self-reflective and honest with ourselves, not even seeing as weaknesses, just opportunities to grow. Like, again, where can I be better? And maybe you're halfway in that journey, maybe you're 3/4 of the way, but it's just a journey and there's no sort of being done. Yes.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking that you talk about biographies and the importance of knowing who the board members are, but there have been a lot of times where I've seen committees work, and the person who introduces the committee say that we have 127 years of collective experience on this board doing this work. And I think, you talk about elevator speeches, maybe that's, along with having individual biographies, having an elevator speech about the collective union of the board and what it provides to the community in terms of 77 years of activism in the community, 126 years of experience with their own children going through the Bridgeport public school system. That kind of a collective biography.
I like that. That's powerful. Anybody at home? I know I've been neglecting you with my back to you. Big Jennifer's keeping good tabs on you.
And 90% gone.
Okay. Any open steps that people want to mention that you haven't gotten a chance to
I
say?
have a question, please. It's a simple question. How you feel, what you think about this board?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Wow.
Again, I wouldn't claim to know.
Wow.
Well,
Knowledge-
Simple.
Yes. Little.
Yeah, just check that.
Observed tonight.
Yeah.
Great question. I'd say what I've observed tonight. You all are very engaged. I haven't seen anyone sort of just staring off into space or playing words with friends. I have a sense that I can feel the passion in this room. People have passion about different things, but I really do believe that you are all passionate about the Bridgeport Public Schools and the kids and families that you serve. I can sense that pretty quickly in a room like this, and there's no part of me that thinks you aren't invested in this work. You aren't hopeful that the future can be brighter, and you know that you've got a role to play in that. I think trying to assess beyond that would be presumptuous on my part. But that's what I see.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Appreciate it.
Any action steps people want to amplify? Things you want to go back and next week and say, can't forget to do this. We're gonna do it.
There's so much I can't even start. I mean, again, you're looking at somebody that it's a leader in the community for so many years. I have a whole congregation that is with me and follow me. I have other organizations that I'm members. So when you talked about certain things, how do we communicate with other people? I'm like, I have so many hats. That's why I don't have a lot of hair. Even in my line of work, what I do, I'm with the community 90% of my time. And it's just what's next. I love the other one, and I've saw it before about the round tables and everything. And I know, like Mr. Traber stated, that it's in our things to do, and that we should be doing. And I'm interested in finding out how do we, with our chair, how do we accomplish that in this next journey that we have right now, because that's a big one. I think that is a huge one. And again, I can speak about some of the colleagues. Like I said, we go to events and we bump into each other. And we sometimes make plans. Somebody can't go to this event. Okay, you go over there, we'll go over here, and we'll split up. That way we have board members in location. So there's a group here that's thing, and it's growing. I can't wait until next season.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I think as one of the reasons, we're gonna do the forums throughout the summer. We have to do them throughout the summer. And one of the reasons I've held out on doing the forums, because I knew we were gonna have this training. I was like, let's do this training first to make sure we do it right. Or, we don't have to, what I mean? We have good new ideas and so in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be having at least 4 forums. That's gonna be required by the state, but then also I would like to not just end it in the end of summer, right? I like the idea of having it spaced out throughout the year, and sort of what Dr. Avery did with his forums, but do it as a board, where we in the beginning of the school year, do something and throughout the year, every quarter or something,
That's great.
come together as a board.
I love that. I just want to make one other sort of plug, if you will. I've made a couple references tonight to John and Tim, and I think it's important to think about the communications office role in this work. And I say that as someone who was in that role for a long time in Boston, in the communications office, and knowing how important it is to try to corral everything. And how do we figure out how as Tim and John and the team under the direction of the superintendent are thinking about communications holistically, as you said, Dr. Avery, how do we sort of think of the board piece of that as a part of that puzzle and not something separate? So I don't want you all going rogue, have your own communication strategy that isn't aligned with what the district's trying to do. At the same time, I know these guys are already probably spread pretty thin, like every other communications office in the world that I know. So how do we think about sort of making sure that we can do this work in ways that make it manageable, but moves the needle a little bit? With that, I just want to thank you all so much for your time. And I should have said at the very outset, thank you also for your service. And I don't say that lightly. These are not glamorous jobs. They're not high-paying jobs. I believe you do it for other reasons that are truly about kids. And we need good people to step up these days. We always do, to take on these roles. I know you get your fair share of arrows coming your way. So I encourage you to stay strong and keep doing the good work. And I really applaud you for engaging in this training and all the growth that you're doing. And I just want to thank you for your service and your attention tonight. So with that, I will turn it back to Jennifer and any housekeeping you need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I just want to back to, we have, I sent you guys the goals that we came together with. The only thing is, one of them, I realized when we first wrote these, it was back in, I believe, late February, early March. That we gave ourselves a deadline for Dr. Avery to do a survey by May 19th, and that's on here. We're obviously past that, so I just want to see if we can, just together agree to say, 2 weeks from today, or I'll say 2 weeks. I was gonna say June 18th was my recommendation, which is the last Wednesday of the school year. 2 weeks and 2 days from now. And that's for the thought exchange survey on enhancing student achievement. So that'll be for Dr. Avery to receive recommendations from staff to the board to identify 3 key areas that focus on student achievement. And so if we can give Dr. Avery 2 weeks to develop that, and then we can, administer the survey by June 18th. And does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we fine with that date?
Yeah,
ahead.
just thinking, where are we supposed to be sending them questions or something like that?
That was for,
Yeah, I can't hear Joe.
he was asking if we're supposed to send.
And I don't
Dr.
think I did that either.
Nobody
He
did.
was asking if we're gonna give Dr. Avery questions as well,
That's
but
what-
that was for the strategic plan and vision.
Division. okay.
Yeah,
I understand you.
so that's a whole different thought.
That still needs
But still,
to come as
that,
well,
yeah.
right?
So,
Still needs to
action
come
items.
as well.
two action items, we're gonna, in 2 weeks, we'll have that survey ready for the staff to, focus on 3 key areas of student achievement. And then, for the board members, also make sure you're sending Dr. Avery questions about the survey for the vision. And that's all in the board goals that were sent to you. So just take a look at that to remind yourself. But, I'll follow up with I know Danielle and I are working on a time, or I should say Danielle, she's been helping out a lot with that. So working on a timeline to make sure we know the dates so that we don't fall behind on anything. So I'll kind of, work with her more on that to make sure we have that, in our calendars, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention to you. If we
Okay,
could
so
start getting that.
18th is fine with everybody? That's 2 weeks and 2 days from now?
I believe we have a consensus.
All right.
No.
I
said
want to thank
consensus first.
Nick and Jody.
Consensus.
With-
Thank you guys, appreciate you guys.
We've been together and
Again.
No motions.
We'll get you for the 20th visit soon. I know.
Chester for the 51st time last week.
So we have somewhere
Yeah.
we need a few more this year. So with that said, is there a motion? Oh, wait, Dr. Avery, one thing.
And I think you guys will be giving the commissioner an update on this final training. I'm starting to meet with the commissioner probably every other week, just to kind of make sure that she wants to engage in the process of what we're doing and how we're continuing moving through the district. And so I will give her a little feedback on how things are going. She did ask me about the training myself, just from my perspective. And the last one was here, the communication piece, which I thought was going to be a big one anyway. So it's good. So I know you got to give a report. I think they have another meeting with the state board next.
Well, as far as us report, I just say we did the training, everybody was in attendance, and that's really and that we talked about, but he has a copy of the agenda, so
Okay.
That's really the extent of our reporting, but
I know I'm not gonna send a report too.
yeah, I think they're more interested in your report at the board meeting as
Okay.
what they're taking as
Got it.
report.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Any,
Second.
I second that? Okay. All in favor?
Two?
Aye.
All right, we're